my wife filed a restraining order, claiming I was emotionally abusive for questioning her spending time with her ex-lover. I didn't fight IT, just closed all the accounts and canceled the business loan I was financing. Her lawyer called 72 hours later, pleading to negotiate. You know what they say about Thursdays? They're like the awkward middle child of weekdays. Not quite hump day, not quite Friday freedom, just there. I was sitting in my corner office, pretending to care about quarterly reports while actually planning my weekend golf game, when my receptionist's voice came through the intercom, sounding like she'd just witnessed a murder. "Adrian, someone's here for you," Melissa squeaked, and I swear I could hear her hands trembling through the speaker system. In 3 years of working for me, the woman had handled angry clients, hostile takeover negotiations, and that one time when my ex-business partner showed up drunk at 9 a.m. demanding his fair share of a company he'd abandoned. But this had her spooked. I figured it was probably another client with their panties in a twist about contract terms. Maybe the Henderson account finally grew a backbone and decided to negotiate instead of just signing whatever I put in front of them. Hell, maybe it was even good news, a referral, a new deal, someone actually wanting to throw money at me for once instead of the other way around. So I strolled down to the lobby with all the confidence of a man who had absolutely no clue his world was about to get flipped upside down like a pancake at IHOP. I was even humming a little tune, something obnoxious from the 80s that had been stuck in my head since my morning commute. Life was good. Business was solid. My biggest worry was whether to get Thai food or pizza for lunch. The guy waiting for me looked exactly like what Central Casting would order if they needed a process server. Cheap suit, nervous energy, and the kind of mustache that screamed, "I peaked in community college." He was shifting his weight from foot to foot like he needed to use the bathroom, clutching a manila envelope like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Adrian Blackwell?" he asked, though we both knew damn well who I was. My name's literally etched in glass on the door behind him. "That's me," I said, extending my hand for what I assumed would be a normal human interaction. Maybe he was delivering a contract or court documents for one of my cases. Or, instead of shaking my hand, this joker shoved the envelope into my chest like he was trying to jumpstart my heart. "You've been served," he announced with all the dramatic flair of a dinner theater actor, then practically sprinted out of there like his ass was on fire. I stood there for a solid 10 seconds, holding this envelope and feeling like I'd just been pranked by the universe. Melissa was staring at me from behind her desk with the kind of wide-eyed expression usually reserved for natural disasters and celebrity meltdowns. A couple of clients in the waiting area were pretending not to watch while absolutely watching every second of this train wreck. "Well," I said to nobody in particular, "this should be interesting." I tore open the envelope right there in the lobby because, honestly, what's the point in dragging out the suspense? The first thing that hit me was the official letterhead, Superior Court of California. The second thing was my wife's name, Serena Blackwell, listed as the petitioner. And the third thing, the real kicker, were the words, "Temporary Restraining Order," stamped across the top in letters so bold they might as well have been screaming. I'm not gonna lie, for about 30 seconds, I just stood there like a deer caught in headlights, reading and rereading those words because my brain refused to process them. A restraining order. Against me. Filed by my own wife. The woman who'd been sharing my bed, my bank account, and my Netflix password for the past 4 years. The accusations read like a greatest hits album of toxic relationship cliches. Emotional abuse. Controlling behavior. Creating a hostile environment. According to this document, I was apparently some kind of monster who had terrorized my poor, innocent wife with my unreasonable demands and manipulative tactics. And what exactly had I done to earn this prestigious title? What heinous crime had I committed that warranted legal intervention? I had asked her why she was spending so much time with Victor. Victor, her ex-boyfriend. The same Victor who'd been sliding into her DMs like a greased seal for the past 6 months. The same Victor who'd been inviting her to catch up over coffee and discuss old times with the subtlety of a freight train. The same Victor who apparently needed my wife's undivided attention to help him through his difficult divorce. So yeah, I'd ask questions. Sue me. Oh wait, she literally just did. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a butter knife and serve it at a dinner party. Here I was, reading about how controlling and financially abusive I allegedly was, while sitting in an office that I'd built from scratch, wearing a suit that I'd paid for, holding papers that detailed how dangerous I was to the woman whose entire lifestyle I'd been bankrolling for years. Let's talk about that lifestyle for a hot minute. Serena's boutique? The one she called her passion project and her creative outlet, funded entirely by yours truly. The business loan that kept her little fashion empire afloat, guaranteed by me. The joint credit cards she used for business expenses that somehow always seemed to involve designer handbags and spa days. All in my name, naturally. I'd covered everything. Her car payment, her health insurance, her gym membership, her monthly trips to that overpriced salon where they charge $50 to make her hair look exactly the same as when she walked in. Hell, I'd even paid for the lawyer who helped her set up the business structure for her boutique, never imagining that same legal framework would eventually be used to freeze me out. But apparently, asking, "Hey honey, why are you texting your ex at midnight?" made me the villain in this story. Apparently, expressing concern about her suddenly jam-packed social calendar with Mr. Tall Dark and recently single made me controlling. Apparently, wanting to know why our joint account was hemorrhaging money faster than a Vegas gambler on a losing streak made me financially abusive. The more I read, the more I had to admire the sheer audacity of it all. According to this document, I was a manipulative puppet master who used money as a weapon to control my wife's every move. Never mind that she'd never held a job that paid more than minimum wage before I came along. Never mind that her business would have folded faster than Superman on laundry day without my financial backing. Never mind that I'd never once, not once, told her she couldn't buy something or go somewhere or see someone. I just asked questions. Reasonable questions. The kind of questions any rational person might ask when their spouse suddenly develops a social life that doesn't include them. But hey, what do I know? I'm just the guy who made it all possible. Standing there in that lobby, surrounded by the quiet murmur of office life continuing around me, I felt something I hadn't expected. Not rage, not heartbreak, not even disappointment. Really, what I felt was clarity, like someone had just handed me a roadmap to my own freedom and highlighted all the best routes. Because here's the thing that Serena clearly hadn't thought through when she was plotting this little legal maneuver. A restraining order works both ways. If she wanted me to stay away from her, if she wanted zero contact, if she wanted to paint me as this dangerous, controlling monster who couldn't be trusted around her, well, then that's exactly what she was going to get. I folded those papers with the care of a man handling fine china, tucked them into my jacket pocket, and walked back upstairs to my office. Melissa watched me go with the kind of concerned expression usually reserved for people walking toward the gallows, but I just gave her a little wave and a smile that probably looked more unsettling than reassuring. Back in my office, I closed the door, sat down at my desk, and made a decision that would change everything. I wasn't going to fight this. I wasn't going to call my lawyer and demand we contest it. I wasn't going to try to convince anyone that I was innocent of these ridiculous charges. Instead, I was going to comply. Enthusiastically, completely, without question or complaint. If Serena wanted a restraining order to protect her from her allegedly abusive husband, then by God, she was going to get the most thorough protection anyone had ever received. I was going to follow every single letter of that court order like it was handed down from Moses himself. And if that compliance happened to have some unintended consequences for the woman who'd just tried to torpedo my reputation and destroy my life, well, that was just the price of safety, wasn't it? After all, I was just trying to be a good, law-abiding citizen. What could possibly go wrong with that? That evening, I did what any rational, law-abiding citizen would do after being served with a restraining order. I poured myself 3 fingers of Macallan 18 and fired up my laptop. Nothing says therapeutic evening like good scotch and online banking, am I right? The restraining order was still sitting on my kitchen counter, looking all official and intimidating with its court seals and legal jargon. But you know what? I'd read that sucker cover to cover about 15 times by now, and I had to hand it to Serena's lawyer. Whoever he was, he'd done his homework. The document was thorough, detailed, and absolutely crystal clear about one thing. I was to have zero contact with my wife. None. Nada. Zilch. No phone calls, no texts, no emails, no showing up at her work, no accidental encounters at Starbucks. I couldn't communicate with her directly or indirectly. I couldn't ask friends to pass along messages. I couldn't even send her a Christmas card if I wanted to. For all legal intents and purposes, Serena Blackwell might as well have been a stranger living on Mars. And you know what the beautiful thing about restraining orders is? They're designed to protect people from unwanted contact and interference. The court system takes that shit seriously. So if I were to continue having any kind of involvement in Serena's life, financial or otherwise, well, that might be construed as a violation. And we absolutely couldn't have that, could we? I mean, what kind of monster would I be if I kept trying to control my wife's life after she'd specifically asked the court to protect her from me? So I started clicking. Click, click, click. Like a man on a mission to clean up his digital life. First stop, our joint credit cards. You know, the ones that Serena had been using to fund her little shopping expeditions and business expenses. The ones where I was the primary cardholder and she was just an authorized user. The ones that were technically mine, but had somehow become her personal ATM over the years. Chase Bank was surprisingly accommodating when I called their customer service line. Mr. Blackwell, you'd like to remove an authorized user from your account? Of course, sir. May I ask the reason? Legal separation, I said, which was technically true. A restraining order is definitely a form of legal separation. I need to protect both parties from any potential complications. The customer service rep, her name was Jennifer, and she sounded like she was probably from Ohio, was all professional sympathy. I completely understand, sir. We see this fairly often. I'll remove Mrs. Blackwell from all your accounts immediately. She'll receive notification that her cards have been deactivated, and you'll get new cards with different numbers within 5 to 7 business days. 3 minutes. That's all it took to cut off Serena's access to about 60 grand in available credit. 3 minutes and a few clicks, and suddenly her financial safety net had a great big hole in it. But wait, there's more. Next up were the automatic transfers I'd set up to keep her boutique afloat. Every month, like clockwork, $3,000 would magically appear in her business account. Not a loan, not a payment for services rendered, just straight up free money because I was a supportive husband who believed in his wife's dreams. Wells Fargo's online banking system made it stupidly easy to cancel recurring transfers. A few clicks, a confirmation code sent to my phone, and boom, no more monthly allowance for Serena's boutique. The next transfer was scheduled for the 15th, but surprise, it wasn't going to happen. Ever again. I'll admit, there was something oddly satisfying about watching those automatic payments disappear from my scheduled transactions. It was like deleting a computer virus or finally throwing away that broken lamp you've been meaning to fix for 3 years. Cleansing, liberating, therapeutic as hell. But the real masterpiece, the piece de resistance of my evening's work, was dealing with the business loan. See, when Serena first opened her boutique, she'd gone to the bank full of dreams and ambition and absolutely zero credit history that would qualify her for a business loan. The bank had taken one look at her application and laughed her right out of the building. Enter yours truly, the supportive husband with excellent credit and a steady income. I'd co-signed that loan, guaranteed it with my own assets, basically told the bank, don't worry, if she can't pay, I will. It was a $40,000 loan at a decent interest rate, and without my signature on those papers, Serena's little fashion empire never would have gotten off the ground. Now, here's where things get interesting from a legal perspective. As a guarantor on that loan, I had certain rights. One of those rights was the ability to withdraw my guarantee under specific circumstances. And wouldn't you know it, being served with a restraining order that accused me of financial abuse seemed like a pretty compelling circumstance. I called my banker, Mr. Collins, at home. Yeah, I know, calling your banker at 8:30 on a Thursday night probably sounds excessive, but when you've got as much money in his bank as I do, you get to have his personal cell number. That's just one of the perks of being a valued customer. Adrian, he answered, sounding genuinely pleased to hear from me. How's business? How's Serena? I haven't seen you two at the client appreciation dinner in a while. Actually, that's why I'm calling, I said, settling back in my leather chair with my scotch. Serena and I are having some legal issues. She's filed a restraining order against me, claiming I'm financially abusive. Obviously, I need to protect myself and the bank from any potential liability. There was a pause. A long pause. The kind of pause that tells you someone's brain is working overtime to process unexpected information. Oh, Collins finally said. Oh my, I'm sorry to hear that, Adrian. That must be incredibly difficult for you. It is what it is, I replied, going for the world-weary but professional tone. Look, I need to withdraw my guarantee on her business loan. I can't risk being accused of continued financial involvement after she specifically told the court that my financial support is abusive. Another pause, shorter this time. I understand completely. From a liability standpoint, that makes perfect sense. When would you like this to take effect? Immediately. Tonight, if possible. Consider it done. I'll have the paperwork prepared first thing in the morning. But Adrian, you understand what this means for the loan, right? Oh, I understood perfectly. Without my guarantee, Serena's loan would be in default faster than you could say insufficient collateral. The bank would demand immediate repayment or alternative guarantee within 30 days. And since Serena's boutique was barely breaking even on a good month, the chances of her finding another guarantor were somewhere between slim and non-existent. I understand, I said, but my hands are tied here. She's made it clear that my financial involvement in her life is unwanted and abusive. I have to respect that. Of course. I'll take care of everything. And Adrian, if there's anything else we can do to help you through this difficult time. Thanks, Collins. I appreciate it. After I hung up, I sat there for a few minutes, swirling the scotch in my glass and contemplating the elegant simplicity of it all. Serena had wanted to paint me as a controlling financial abuser, so I was giving her exactly what she'd asked for: complete financial independence. No more joint credit cards to abuse her with. No more automatic transfers to control her business. No more loan guarantees to manipulate her with. She was finally, truly free from my toxic financial influence. Free to succeed or fail entirely on her own merits. Free to build her business empire without the burden of my support. Free to live the independent life she'd apparently been craving all along. For the first time in years, I didn't have to worry about whether her boutique was making money. I didn't have to stress about surprise credit card bills or wonder where my money was going each month. I didn't have to lie awake at night calculating whether we could afford her latest business investment or marketing opportunity. The silence in my house was profound. No buzzing phone demanding immediate transfers for urgent business expenses. No panic calls about cash flow problems. No guilt trips about not being supportive enough of her entrepreneurial dreams. Just peace. Pure, blessed peace. I raised my glass to the empty room. Here's to freedom, I said aloud, and knocked back the rest of my scotch. Tomorrow was going to be a very interesting day. Saturday morning hit me like a warm hug from my grandmother. Peaceful, comfortable, and completely devoid of financial anxiety. I woke up naturally around 8:30. Which was a minor miracle considering I'd usually spend my weekends fielding frantic texts from Serena about urgent boutique emergencies that somehow always required immediate cash infusions. But this morning, blissful silence. No notifications lighting up my phone like a Christmas tree. No desperate voicemails about suppliers demanding payment or rent being due or some critical piece of equipment mysteriously breaking down right when she needed it most. Just me, my coffee maker, and the kind of Saturday morning that God intended for civilized human beings. I was sitting on my back deck, drinking what had to be the best cup of coffee I'd had in months, when my phone rang. Unknown number. Normally, I'd let that shit go straight to voicemail. 9 times out of 10, it's either a telemarketer trying to extend my car warranty or some political campaign begging for money. But something about the timing felt significant, so I picked up. Adrian Blackwell. I answered, using my professional voice because you never know who might be calling. Mr. Blackwell, good morning. This is Martin Rhodes, attorney at law. I represent your wife, Serena Blackwell. Well. The plot thickens. I leaned back in my chair, suddenly very interested in where this conversation was heading. In my experience, when lawyers call you on Saturday morning, it's either very good news or very bad news. And considering the events of the past 48 hours, I had a pretty good idea which category this fell into. Mr. Rhodes, I said, injecting just the right amount of polite confusion into my voice. I wasn't expecting to hear from anyone this morning. How can I help you? There was a pause on the other end, the kind of pause that tells you someone's trying to figure out how to deliver bad news without sounding like they're delivering bad news. Rhodes cleared his throat, and when he spoke, his voice had that carefully measured tone that lawyers use when they're tap dancing around a landmine. Mr. Blackwell, there appears to have been some sort of misunderstanding regarding certain financial arrangements. I almost choked on my coffee. Misunderstanding? That was rich. I'm sorry, Mr. Rhodes, but I'm not sure what you're referring to. Could you be more specific? Another pause. Longer this time. I could practically hear the guy's brain working overtime, trying to figure out how to spin this conversation in his client's favor. Well, it seems that certain accounts have been altered. Joint credit cards have been closed, automatic transfers have been canceled, and there are questions about a business loan guarantee. I said, nodding even though he couldn't see me. Yes, I can explain that. You see, your client filed a restraining order against me, alleging that I'm financially abusive and controlling. Obviously, I can't risk continued involvement in her financial affairs after such serious accusations. I'm simply complying with the spirit of the court order by removing myself from any situation where I might be accused of further abuse. The silence on the other end was so profound, I actually checked to make sure the call hadn't dropped. When Rhodes finally spoke, his voice had lost some of that professional composure. Mr. Blackwell, surely you understand that the restraining order doesn't require you to completely withdraw financial support. I almost laughed out loud. Almost. But instead, I went for confused concern. Mr. Rhodes, I'm not a lawyer, but it seems to me that continuing to provide financial support to someone who's told the court I'm abusing them with money would be problematic. I mean, how would that look? Your Honor, I know my client claims he's financially abusive, but she still wants him to pay her bills? That doesn't seem like a winning argument. I could hear papers rustling in the background. Rhodes was clearly scrambling, probably looking through the restraining order, trying to find some loophole that would force me to keep bankrolling his client's lifestyle. The order specifically prohibits contact and harassment, he said finally. It doesn't address ongoing financial obligations between spouses. You're absolutely right, I agreed cheerfully. It doesn't address them, which is exactly why I'm being so careful to avoid any situation that might be construed as using money to control or manipulate your client. I'm sure you understand my position here, Mr. Rhodes. I've been accused of some pretty serious stuff. The last thing I want is to give your client more ammunition for her case by continuing behaviors she's characterized as abusive. The conversation was getting more entertaining by the minute. I could practically feel Rhodes's frustration through the phone line. Here was a guy who'd probably taken this case thinking it would be a slam dunk. Scorned wife gets restraining order. Husband gets forced to pay through the nose while fighting the charges. Everyone goes home happy except for the poor bastard footing the bills. Except his client had apparently forgotten to mention one tiny detail. Her entire world ran on her husband's credit and goodwill. Without me propping up her house of cards, the whole thing was about to come tumbling down faster than a Jenga tower in an earthquake. Mr. Blackwell, Rhodes said, and now his voice had taken on a slightly pleading quality that he was trying very hard to disguise as professional concern. Perhaps we could arrange a meeting to discuss this situation. I'm sure we can find a reasonable solution that works for everyone. A meeting, I repeated, letting my voice rise slightly in what I hoped sounded like genuine alarm. Mr. Rhodes, your client has a restraining order against me. She's told the court that she's afraid of me, that I'm dangerous, that contact with me causes her emotional distress. How could I possibly agree to a meeting? That would be incredibly irresponsible of me. What if she claimed I was trying to intimidate her or coerce her into dropping the charges? We could arrange for a neutral location, with proper supervision. No, I interrupted, shaking my head vigorously even though he couldn't see me. I appreciate the offer, Mr. Rhodes, I really do. But I have to think about protecting both your client and myself here. The court order is very clear about maintaining distance. I won't risk violating it, not even in a supervised setting. That wouldn't be fair to anyone involved. The desperation in his voice was getting harder to hide. Surely there must be some way to address the immediate financial concerns while the legal proceedings are ongoing. The immediate financial concerns? I repeated thoughtfully. Well, I suppose your client could apply for emergency spousal support through the court. Or maybe she could contact her family for assistance. Or perhaps she could explore business loans based on her own credit and collateral. There are lots of options for someone who wants to maintain their independence. I was really enjoying this conversation now. It was like watching someone try to solve a puzzle when half the pieces were missing and the other half were on fire. Mr. Blackwell, I think you're being deliberately obtuse about this situation. Obtuse. I let hurt creep into my voice. Mr. Rhodes, I'm trying to be responsible here. Your client has made some very serious accusations against me. She's told the court that my involvement in her life is harmful and unwanted. I'm simply respecting her wishes and the legal process. Isn't that what I'm supposed to do? There was another long pause, and when Rhodes spoke again, I could tell he was barely holding on to his professional demeanor. This is a very unusual interpretation of the court order. Maybe so, I conceded. But it's the safest interpretation. And given the circumstances, I think safety has to be my top priority, don't you? I mean, we're talking about serious accusations here. Financial abuse, emotional manipulation, controlling behavior. These aren't parking tickets we're dealing with. I could hear Rhodes take a deep breath, probably counting to 10 in his head. Perhaps if we could arrange for communication through counsel. Mr. Rhodes, I interrupted gently. I'm going to stop you right there. I understand you're trying to help your client, and I respect that. But I've made my position clear. I will not risk violating the restraining order or exposing myself to additional accusations of abuse. If your client wants to discuss financial arrangements, she'll need to do it through the proper legal channels, with full court oversight and approval. And if she files for emergency spousal support, then the court will make a determination based on the facts and the law, I said reasonably. And I'm sure my attorney will present a thorough defense, including documentation of how my previous financial support was characterized as abuse by your client. The line went quiet for what felt like a full minute. When Rhodes spoke again, his voice was tight with barely controlled frustration. Mr. Blackwell, I don't think you fully understand the consequences of your actions. I smiled at that. Oh, I understand them perfectly, Mr. Rhodes. Your client wanted independence from my allegedly abusive financial control, and now she has it. Completely. Isn't that what she asked for? This conversation is over, he said curtly. Have a wonderful day, Mr. Rhodes. And please give your client my best wishes for her new, independent lifestyle. I hung up and immediately pulled out my laptop to document the call. Date, time, duration, summary of conversation, everything my own lawyer would need if this ended up being relevant later. Because if there's one thing I've learned in business, it's that you document everything, especially when dealing with people who might try to twist your words later. After I finished typing up my notes, I poured myself another cup of coffee and went back out to the deck. The morning was still beautiful, my stress levels were practically non-existent, and somewhere across town, a lawyer was probably having a very uncomfortable conversation with his client about the realities of financial independence. Life was good, really good. Monday morning rolled around with all the subtlety of a freight train carrying a cargo of drama and bullshit. I was barely through my first cup of coffee when my phone started buzzing with notifications. Not the usual work emails or client requests. No, this was social media warfare, and apparently I was enemy number one. It started with a text from my buddy Mike. Dude, you might want to check Facebook. Serena's friend is going nuclear about you. Ah, Clarissa. I should have seen this coming. Clarissa Martinez, Serena's best friend since college, social media influencer wannabe, and professional shit-stirrer extraordinaire. If there was drama to be found within a 50-mile radius, Clarissa would not only find it, she'd amplify it, live stream it, and probably try to monetize it through her lifestyle brand. I pulled up Facebook on my phone, and there it was, a post that had already racked up 200 likes and was climbing faster than gas prices in a crisis. The headline was Pure Clarissa. When financial abuse wears a three-piece suit, broken heart, money with wings. Oh, this was going to be good. Ladies, I need to talk to you about something serious. The post began because Clarissa always addressed her social media posts like she was hosting a talk show for suburban moms. My dear friend Serena is going through something that no woman should ever have to experience. Her husband, who I won't name, but some of you know, has shown his true colors in the most disgusting way possible. I had to admire her restraint in not naming me directly. Probably her lawyer told her to avoid anything that could be construed as defamation. Smart girl. This man, she continued, has been financially abusing my friend for years, controlling every penny, monitoring her spending, making her feel guilty for every dollar she spent on herself or her business. And now, just because she finally found the courage to stand up to him, he's punishing her by cutting off all financial support. I nearly snorted coffee through my nose. Controlling every penny? I'd literally been handing Serena blank checks for years. The woman had spent more on handbags in the past 6 months than most people spend on cars. But Clarissa was just getting warmed up. He pulled the loan on her business, y'all. Her business. The thing she's worked so hard to build. Her dream. Her independence. And he's destroying it out of pure spite. This is what financial abuse looks like. This is how toxic men operate. They seem supportive until you try to leave. Then they show you what they're really made of. The comments section was already a dumpster fire of supportive outrage. OMG, what a monster. Men like this should be in jail. Your friend deserves so much better. I hope she takes him for everything in the divorce. I screenshotted the whole thing, naturally. Then I kept scrolling. That's when I found the real gold mine. A comment thread where Clarissa was getting a little too chatty with her supporters. One of her followers had asked for more details, and Clarissa, apparently drunk on righteous indignation and social media attention, had spilled way more than she probably intended. Girl, it's even worse than that. Clarissa had replied to someone named Jennifer who had a profile picture of her holding a wine glass. Serena told me he pulled the loan guarantee the same day she got the restraining order. Like, literally the same day. She was just trying to protect herself from his emotional abuse, and he immediately retaliated by destroying her livelihood. Jennifer replied with a series of angry face emojis, but then another friend jumped in, someone named Ashley who apparently had some business sense. Wait, Ashley wrote. He was guaranteeing her business loan, and she filed a restraining order against him? Girl, that's actually pretty standard. My cousin went through something similar, and her lawyer told her to expect exactly that. You can't have someone guarantee your loan and then claim they're financially abusing you. That's like a conflict of interest or something. Oh, Ashley. Sweet, logical Ashley. I wanted to send her a fruit basket. But Clarissa wasn't having any of that reasonable analysis. It doesn't matter what's standard, she shot back. It's vindictive. He's using money as a weapon to hurt her for speaking out. That's literally the definition of financial abuse. And this is where Clarissa's big mouth really got her in trouble, she posted a screenshot. A screenshot of a text conversation between her and Serena from the previous night. The timestamp showed 11:47 p.m., and Serena's message was a masterpiece of unintentional self-incrimination. Clarissa, I'm freaking out. He pulled the loan. Now I can't keep the shop open. The restraining order was supposed to make him behave, not give him an excuse to destroy everything. What am I going to do? Clarissa had replied with something supportive about how Serena was so brave and how karma would get him. But the damage was done. There it was, in black and white. Serena had expected the restraining order to control my behavior while leaving her financial benefits intact. I screenshotted that conversation faster than a paparazzi photographer at a celebrity meltdown. Then I sent it to my lawyer, Gregory Hartman, along with a text. Christmas came early this year. My phone rang about 10 minutes later. Gregory's voice was practically vibrating with suppressed laughter. Adrian, please tell me this is real and not some elaborate Photoshop job. Oh, it's real, all right. Clarissa posted it herself about an hour ago. I've got screenshots of the whole thread. This is... Gregory paused, and I could hear him trying to compose himself. This is the kind of evidence that defense attorneys dream about. She's essentially admitting that the restraining order was filed as a strategic move to control your behavior while maintaining financial benefits. That's what I thought, I said, grinning. But wait, there's more. I walked him through the rest of Clarissa's social media rant, including her claims about my vindictive behavior and her detailed description of events that she couldn't possibly know unless Serena had told her, which meant Serena had been discussing legal strategy with friends, potentially undermining any claims about being afraid or traumatized. She's digging her own grave, Gregory said, and I could practically hear him rubbing his hands together with glee. Keep monitoring this. Screenshot everything. And whatever you do, don't respond or engage. Let them keep talking. Wouldn't dream of it, I assured him. I'm just an innocent bystander watching the drama unfold. After I hung up with Gregory, I decided to take a little stroll around the office to see if the drama had made its way into my professional life. Sure enough, my colleague Jonah was practically bouncing off the walls when I walked into the break room. Holy shit, Adrian, he said, looking around to make sure no one else was listening. I saw Serena's friends post about you. That's some serious accusations she's throwing around. Jonah had met Serena a few times at company events, and I could tell he was fishing for gossip while trying to maintain plausible deniability. Classic office behavior. Everyone wants the tea, but nobody wants to admit they're stirring the pot. Yeah, I saw it, I said casually, pouring myself another cup of coffee. Social media, you know? People say all kinds of things online. But the stuff about financial abuse. Jonah pressed, lowering his voice conspiratorially. That's pretty heavy stuff to just make up. I shrugged, going for the world-weary but dignified approach. People going through divorces say a lot of things, Jonah. Emotions run high, accusations fly around. The truth usually comes out in the end. Are you holding up okay? I mean, this has got to be rough, having your personal business aired out like that. I'm doing fine, I said, and for the first time in months, I actually meant it. Better than fine, actually. Sometimes the trash takes itself out, you know? Jonah raised an eyebrow at that, but before he could ask for clarification, Sarah from accounting walked in, and the conversation shifted to safer topics like weekend plans and the company's new health insurance options. The rest of the day passed in a blur of work calls and client meetings, but I could feel the undercurrent of office gossip swirling around me. People were definitely talking, but in that careful way that office workers perfect. Meaningful looks, hushed conversations that stop when you walk by, the occasional text message sent while maintaining eye contact. By 5 o'clock, Clarissa's post had garnered over 1,000 likes and hundreds of comments, most of them expressing outrage on Serena's behalf. But buried in all that supportive noise were a few voices of reason. People who pointed out that the situation seemed more complicated than Clarissa was presenting, people who asked uncomfortable questions about the timeline of events, people who suggested that maybe there were two sides to this story. I made sure to screenshot those comments too. Not because I planned to use them. I had more than enough ammunition already, but because they showed that not everyone was buying the narrative that Team Serena was trying to sell. As I was getting ready to leave the office, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. We need to talk. This is getting out of hand. I stared at that message for a long moment, then deleted it without responding. The restraining order was crystal clear about no contact, and I wasn't about to give Serena or her lawyer any excuse to claim I was harassing her. Instead, I forwarded a screenshot of the text to Gregory with a note. Violation of her own restraining order? His response was immediate. Don't respond. Document everything. Let her hang herself. I drove home that evening with the windows down and the radio up, feeling lighter than I had in years. Somewhere across town, Serena was probably realizing that social media warfare was a double-edged sword, and that having friends who couldn't keep their mouths shut was maybe not the tactical advantage she'd thought it would be. Tomorrow was going to be even more interesting than today. Wednesday morning started like any other day in paradise. Coffee, newspaper, zero financial anxiety about funding someone else's delusional business ventures. I was halfway through an article about tech stocks when my phone rang. The caller ID showed Wells Fargo Business Banking, and I knew exactly who it was before I even picked up. Mr. Blackwell, this is Kevin Collins. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Not at all, Kevin. What can I do for you? There was a pause, the kind of pause that bankers use when they're about to deliver news that's going to ruin someone's day. Fortunately, I had a pretty good feeling it wasn't going to be my day getting ruined. Well, sir, I wanted to give you an update on the Serena's boutique loan situation. As you know, with your guarantee withdrawn, we've been working with Mrs. Blackwell to find alternative arrangements. Of course, I said, settling back in my chair. How's that going? Another pause. Longer this time. Not well, I'm afraid. Mrs. Blackwell has been in twice this week, and I have to tell you, she seems quite distressed about the situation. She's asked if there's any way we can reinstate your guarantee without your direct involvement. I nearly choked on my coffee. She asked you to forge my signature? Oh no, nothing like that, Collins said quickly. She suggested that perhaps there was some sort of automatic renewal clause, or that maybe your original guarantee could be extended based on your marital obligations. This was getting better by the minute. Kevin, you explained to her that loan guarantees don't work that way, right? I did. Multiple times. She seemed to have difficulty accepting that information. I bet she did. Serena had spent so many years operating under the assumption that my money was her money that the concept of actual financial independence was probably giving her hives. So what's the timeline looking like? I asked, though I already knew the answer. Well, without a new guarantor or significant additional collateral, the loan goes into default in. I could hear papers rustling. 25 days. Mrs. Blackwell would need to either pay the full balance, which is currently $37,412, or we'd have to begin repossession proceedings. 37 grand. In 25 days. For a woman whose boutique had never turned a profit and whose personal credit limit wouldn't cover a decent used car. This was going to be like watching a train wreck in slow motion. Except the train was filled with overpriced handbags and delusions of entrepreneurial grandeur. I understand, I said. Thanks for keeping me informed, Kevin. I know this puts you in a difficult position. Actually, Mr. Blackwell, there is one more thing. His voice took on that careful, professional tone that meant he was about to drop another bombshell. We received some unusual documentation yesterday. Paperwork that appeared to have your signature, requesting an extension of your guarantee. My blood went cold. Appeared to have my signature? Yes, sir. Our fraud department flagged it immediately. The signature didn't match our samples, and frankly, it looked like someone had traced it from another document. We've reported it to the police as suspected forgery. Holy shit. Do you know who submitted the paperwork? It was hand-delivered by an older woman who identified herself as Mrs. Blackwell's mother. Lorraine Thompson, I believe. Lorraine. Of course it was Lorraine. Serena's mother. The woman who'd raised financial manipulation to an art form and apparently passed those skills down to her daughter like a fucked-up family heirloom. I'd met Lorraine exactly 3 times in 4 years of marriage, and each encounter had left me feeling like I needed a shower and a security audit. The woman had the moral compass of a Vegas casino and the subtlety of a brick through a window. She'd spent our entire wedding reception making not-so-subtle hints about how I should invest in her MLM essential oils business, and she'd once tried to get me to co-sign a car loan for her boyfriend's nephew's girlfriend's cousin or some equally ridiculous connection. Kevin, I want to be very clear about this. I did not sign any extension paperwork. I did not authorize anyone to sign on my behalf. And I absolutely did not change my mind about withdrawing my guarantee. I understand completely, sir. We've already voided the fraudulent documents, and as I mentioned, the police have been notified. I wanted to call you directly to make sure you were aware of the situation. I appreciate that. Will I need to file a separate police report? That would probably be advisable, yes. The more documentation we have, the stronger the case becomes. After I hung up with Collins, I sat there for a few minutes, just processing the sheer audacity of what had just happened. Serena and her mother had actually attempted to forge my signature to extend a loan guarantee. Not only was this fraud, it was incredibly stupid fraud. Banks don't just accept random paperwork without verification, especially when it involves tens of thousands of dollars. I called Gregory immediately. Let me get this straight, he said after I'd explained the situation. Your wife files a restraining order claiming you're financially abusive. Then her mother tries to forge your signature to keep you financially involved. That's about the size of it. Adrian, this case just went from divorce court drama to potential criminal charges. Forgery, attempted fraud. This is serious federal shit now. The kind of stuff that comes with jail time. I could hear the excitement in his voice. Gregory lived for this kind of legal warfare. He was like a shark who'd just smelled blood in the water, and that blood belonged to people stupid enough to commit crimes while already involved in legal proceedings. What do I need to do? I asked. First, file that police report today. Get everything on record. Second, I'm going to contact the DA's office and make sure they're aware of the connection between the restraining order and the fraud attempt. This shows a pattern of behavior that completely undermines their abuse narrative. Pattern of behavior? Think about it. She files a restraining order claiming you're controlling and abusive, but simultaneously her mother is trying to forge your signature to maintain financial benefits. That's not the behavior of someone who's afraid of their abuser. That's the behavior of someone trying to have their cake and eat it too. After I hung up with Gregory, I drove straight to the police station to file my report. The desk sergeant, a tired-looking woman in her 50s, took my statement with the kind of weary professionalism that suggested she'd seen every variety of human stupidity multiple times. So let me make sure I understand this, she said, reading through my statement. Your wife has a restraining order against you for alleged financial abuse, but her mother tried to forge your signature to keep you financially involved in her business? That's correct. She shook her head. 23 years on the force, and people still find new ways to surprise me. We'll investigate this thoroughly, Mr. Blackwell. Fraud is fraud, regardless of family relationships. On my way home, I stopped by Serena's boutique just to see how things were looking. Not to go inside, obviously. The restraining order made that impossible, but I parked across the street and observed from a safe distance. The place looked rough. The usual bustling energy was gone, replaced by an almost desperate quiet. Through the windows, I could see Serena inside, talking animatedly on the phone while gesturing wildly with her free hand. Even from across the street, her body language screamed panic and frustration. There were only 2 customers in the store, both of them browsing half-heartedly through racks of overpriced clothes that nobody really needed. The sale? Everything must go. Signs in the windows told me everything I needed to know about the boutique's financial situation. As I watched, a woman in a business suit walked out of the store, shaking her head and looking annoyed. Probably another supplier demanding payment, or maybe a landlord discussing late rent. The boutique was hemorrhaging money faster than a punctured artery, and without my financial transfusions, it was only a matter of time before it bled out completely. I pulled out my phone and took a few discreet photos of the storefront, documenting the everything must go signs and the general state of desperation. Not for any malicious purpose, just for my records. If this ended up in court, it might be useful to have visual evidence of how quickly the business had deteriorated without my support. As I was getting ready to leave, I saw Lorraine's beat-up Honda Civic pull into the parking lot. Speak of the devil. Serena's mother got out of the car, looking around nervously like she expected police to jump out of the bushes. Which, given recent events, probably wasn't an unreasonable fear. Lorraine hurried into the boutique, and through the window, I could see her and Serena in what appeared to be an intense conversation. Lots of hand-waving and agitated gestures, probably discussing their next brilliant scheme to solve their financial problems. I started my car and drove away, smiling to myself. 25 days until the loan defaulted. 25 days for them to come up with $37,000 or find another sucker willing to guarantee their failing business. I gave them maybe 10 days before the real panic set in. Maybe 15 if they were particularly delusional about their prospects. Either way, it was going to be one hell of a show. And the best part? I had front row seats and absolutely no responsibility for the outcome. Sometimes life really does work out exactly the way it's supposed to. The thing about watching someone else's life implode is that it's simultaneously fascinating and horrifying. Like rubbernecking at a car accident, except the accident keeps happening in slow motion over several weeks. By Thursday of that week, the show was getting really entertaining. My credit monitoring service, yeah, I pay for that shit because I'm not an idiot, sent me an alert that made me nearly spit out my morning coffee. Serena had just maxed out her personal credit cards. All of them. In the span of 3 days, she'd gone from having decent available credit to being tapped out at just over 15 grand across 4 different cards. Now, you might think that someone facing a $37,000 business loan default would use their available credit to, try to save the business. But you'd be thinking like a rational person, and rational thinking had clearly left the building along with Serena's financial security. Instead, according to the transaction alerts I was still receiving, because apparently when you're married, credit monitoring services don't automatically stop sharing information even when restraining orders are involved. Serena had gone on what could only be described as a therapeutic shopping spree of epic proportions. Nordstrom, $1,847. Louis Vuitton, $2,234. Some boutique in Beverly Hills I'd never heard of, $1,156. Saks Fifth Avenue, $998. And that was just Monday. Tuesday brought visits to Tiffany & Company, Neiman Marcus, and what appeared to be a high-end day spa that charged more for a facial than most people spend on groceries in a month. It was like watching someone try to put out a fire by throwing designer handbags at it. The logic was absolutely breathtaking in its complete absence of logic. I forwarded all the alerts to Gregory, who called me back within the hour, laughing so hard he could barely speak. "Adrian," he wheezed, "please tell me you're seeing what I'm seeing. This woman is about to lose her business. Her mother just committed fraud on her behalf, and she's responding by buying jewelry. That's retail therapy for you," I said. "When life gives you lemons, buy a Louis Vuitton bag to carry them in. This is incredible. We're documenting financial irresponsibility in real time. If she tries to claim she was financially dependent on you or that losing your support caused her hardship, we can show the court that she responded to financial crisis by going on a $15,000 shopping spree. It gets better, I told him. She's maxed out her cards, which means she's now completely dependent on whatever cash the boutique generates. And based on what I saw yesterday, that's not much. Meanwhile, the social media drama was reaching new heights of absurdity. Clarissa had apparently appointed herself as Serena's official PR representative, posting daily updates about her friend's brave struggle against financial abuse. The narrative was getting more elaborate and more divorced from reality with each passing day. Tuesday's post was a real masterpiece. Day 5 of Serena's journey to independence. Despite her toxic ex's attempts to destroy everything she's built, she's staying strong and focusing on self-care. Sometimes the best revenge is living well. Flexed biceps sparkles #self-care #survivor #bosslady. The post was accompanied by photos of Serena at that expensive spa, looking relaxed and pampered while getting what appeared to be a gold leaf facial. The caption underneath read, "Taking time to heal and recharge. You can't pour from an empty cup. Red heart." The irony was so thick you could serve it at a dinner party. Here was a woman supposedly devastated by financial abuse, healing herself through financial excess. It was like watching someone claim they're lactose intolerant while chugging a milkshake. But the comments section was where things got really interesting. The usual chorus of supportive friends was still there, but cracks were starting to show. A few people were asking uncomfortable questions. "Wait, didn't you say yesterday that she was struggling to keep her business open?" asked someone named Michelle. "How is she affording spa treatments if her husband cut off her money?" inquired a woman named Lisa. Clarissa, bless her heart, tried to spin it. Serena's friends are supporting her through this difficult time. We're making sure she knows her worth. But the damage was done. People were starting to notice that the narrative didn't quite add up. If Serena was truly a victim of financial abuse who had been left destitute by her controlling husband, where was the money for luxury spa days coming from? By Thursday, the boutique situation had gone from critical to terminal. I knew this because my barber, of all people, filled me in on the drama. "You know that fancy women's clothing store on 5th Street? Tony asked while trimming my hair. "The one with all the expensive stuff? Serena's boutique?" I asked innocently. "That's the one. My wife went by there yesterday, and apparently 2 of the employees were cleaning out their lockers, quitting on the spot. The owner couldn't make payroll." I made appropriately sympathetic noises while internally calculating how long a business could survive without employees. The answer, in case you're curious, is not very long at all. The word around town is that the place is going under. Tony continued, apparently unaware that he was talking to the soon-to-be ex-husband of the owner. "My wife said the woman who owns it was crying in the back office while customers were trying to return merchandise." That afternoon, Martin Rhodes called again. Serena's lawyer sounded even more desperate than he had the previous week, if that was possible. "Mr. Blackwell, I'm calling to discuss a potential settlement offer." "Settlement?" I said, genuinely confused. "Settlement of what? I haven't filed any legal action against your client. I'm just complying with her restraining order." "Yes, well," he cleared his throat. "My client is prepared to consider modifications to the current arrangement in exchange for some financial accommodation during this transition period." Translation: Serena was broke and panicking and wanted to negotiate her way out of the hole she dug for herself. "Mr. Rhodes, I thought I made my position clear. The restraining order prohibits me from having any involvement in your client's life, financial or otherwise. Surely you're not suggesting I violate a court order. There are ways to structure financial support that wouldn't require direct contact." "Mr. Rhodes," I interrupted, "let me ask you something. If your client is truly afraid of me, as she claimed in her restraining order petition, why is she asking for financial support from someone she considers dangerous?" Silence on the other end. "And if she's not actually afraid of me, if this restraining order was filed for strategic rather than safety reasons, wouldn't that constitute perjury?" More silence. "I'm going to hang up now," Rhodes said finally. "But I want you to know that my client is prepared to make this very difficult for you if you continue to be unreasonable." "Difficult how?" I asked. "More restraining orders?" More accusations of abuse. More social media campaigns painting me as a monster? Bring it on, counselor. I've got nothing to hide. After he hung up, I called Gregory to report the conversation. They're getting desperate, he said with obvious satisfaction. When lawyers start making vague threats about making things difficult, it means they don't have any actual legal leverage left. How long do you think before they crack completely? Given the timeline on the business loan, I'd say we're looking at maybe 10 days before we see some really interesting developments. Maybe 2 weeks if they manage to find another sucker to exploit. That evening, I treated myself to dinner at my favorite steakhouse, the kind of place where the steaks cost more than some people spend on groceries in a week. While I was enjoying a perfectly cooked ribeye and a glass of excellent wine, I couldn't help but reflect on how dramatically my life had improved in less than 2 weeks. No more anxiety about surprise bills. No more wondering where my money was going each month. No more walking on eggshells around someone who treated my bank account like her personal ATM while simultaneously resenting me for having money in the first place. For the first time in years, I was eating dinner without my phone buzzing with urgent requests for money transfers or panicked messages about business emergencies. The silence was absolutely golden. As I was finishing my meal, my phone buzzed with a text from another unknown number. This is Lorraine. We need to talk. Serena is in serious trouble, and this has gone too far. I screenshotted the message, deleted it, and ordered dessert. Let them panic. Let them scramble. Let them realize what it actually costs to maintain the lifestyle they've been taking for granted. I had 21 days left until the loan defaulted, and I was going to enjoy every single one of them. Monday morning brought the kind of news that makes you believe in karma, justice, and the fundamental fairness of the universe. I was sitting in my office, reviewing contracts and pretending to care about quarterly projections, when my phone rang. Detective Martinez from the Fraud Division. Mr. Blackwell, we've made an arrest in your case. I set down my coffee and gave the conversation my full attention. Lorraine Thompson? That's correct, sir. We picked her up this morning at her residence. The evidence was pretty overwhelming. Not only did we have the forged loan documents from the bank, but we found additional fraudulent paperwork in her possession. Additional paperwork? It appears Mrs. Thompson attempted to access your insurance policies as well. She had forged authorization forms requesting policy details and beneficiary information. Your insurance company flagged it and contacted us directly. I had to hand it to Lorraine. When the woman decided to commit fraud, she really went all in. It wasn't enough to forge my signature on loan documents. She had to try to get her grubby little hands on my life insurance too. The sheer ambition of it was almost admirable in a completely fucked up way. Any idea how she got copies of my signature to trace? Based on what we found in her house, it looks like she was using documents from your wedding, marriage certificate, gift registry paperwork, that sort of thing. She had quite a collection of your signatures to work from. Of course she did. I remembered now. Lorraine had insisted on helping with the wedding paperwork, claiming she wanted to take some of the stress off Serena. At the time, I thought it was sweet that she wanted to be involved. Now I realized she'd been conducting reconnaissance for future fraud operations. What happens next, detective? She's been charged with multiple counts of forgery, attempted fraud, and identity theft. With the evidence we have, this is looking at serious jail time. Her arraignment is scheduled for Thursday. After I hung up, I immediately called Gregory to share the good news. His reaction was everything I could have hoped for. Adrian, this is beautiful. Absolutely beautiful. Do you understand what this means for the restraining order case? Enlighten me. Your wife claimed you were financially abusive, but her own mother was simultaneously committing financial crimes using your identity. No judge is going to look at that pattern and think you're the villain here. This shows a family-wide culture of financial manipulation and deception. But the best was yet to come. Around noon, Gregory called back, practically giggling with excitement. You need to see this, he said. Check your email. I'm sending you some text message screenshots that the police recovered from Lorraine's phone. I opened the attachment, and there it was, a complete record of conversations between Lorraine and Serena dating back 3 weeks. The messages were like a masterclass in fraud planning and mother-daughter criminal conspiracy. The conversation started innocently enough, with Lorraine asking about the money situation and Serena explaining that I'd pulled all support out of spite. But then things got interesting. Can't you just sign his name to extend the loan? Lorraine had texted. His signature is pretty simple. I've seen it on the wedding stuff. Mom, that's illegal, Serena had replied. Only if they catch you. Banks don't check that stuff carefully. I know a guy who did it for his ex-wife's mortgage. I can't ask you to do that. You're not asking, I'm offering. Family helps family, honey. The next series of messages were even more damning. Lorraine had sent photos of my signature from various documents, asking Serena to confirm which version looked most natural. They discussed the best time to deliver the forged paperwork when the regular manager isn't there, and what story to tell if anyone asked questions. Urgent family emergency. Husband is traveling. But the real gem was a message from just 4 days ago. Don't worry about the insurance thing. I found copies of his policy numbers in your wedding folder. If we can't get the loan extended, maybe there are other options. Men his age have heart attacks all the time. I stared at that message for a solid minute, reading it over and over again. Lorraine hadn't just been planning financial fraud. She'd apparently been researching my life insurance policies with some very specific intentions in mind. Gregory was still on the phone, waiting for my reaction. Did you see the insurance message? He asked. Yeah, I saw it. Jesus Christ, Gregory. She was talking about killing me. It's probably not actionable as a direct threat. Too vague, too much plausible deniability. But it definitely shows premeditation and a pattern of escalating criminal behavior. The police had apparently shown these messages to Serena during her mother's arrest, because by 2 o'clock that afternoon, Martin Rhodes had withdrawn as her counsel. I found this out when Gregory called, barely able to contain his laughter. Rhodes is off the case, he announced. Filed a motion to withdraw this morning, citing irreconcilable differences with client regarding legal strategy. Translation? He doesn't want to be associated with someone whose family is committing felonies in support of her legal case. Smart move, actually. This kind of thing can destroy a lawyer's reputation. So who's representing her now? Some bottom feeder named Travis Kellerman. Ambulance chaser, specializes in personal injury and messy divorces. The kind of lawyer you hire when the good lawyers won't return your calls. Travis Kellerman. I'd heard the name before, usually in connection with late-night TV commercials promising to get you the money you deserve and billboards featuring his face next to slogans like, "Don't settle for less." The guy had the kind of reputation that made actual lawyers cringe. Sure enough, by Thursday afternoon, I'd received a letter from Travis Kellerman's office. The letterhead was garish, bright red text on yellow paper, like a used car lot advertisement. The language was pure ambulance chaser melodrama. Mr. Blackwell, the letter began, my client, Mrs. Serena Blackwell, finds herself in dire circumstances due to your vindictive and calculated withdrawal of financial support. Despite the tragic situation involving her mother, Mrs. Blackwell remains committed to resolving this matter amicably. The letter went on to demand emergency spousal support of $5,000 per month, plus immediate reinstatement of my loan guarantee, plus coverage of Serena's legal fees. In exchange, they were generously offering to consider modifications to the restraining order. I forwarded the letter to Gregory, who called me back within an hour, still chuckling. This guy is a piece of work, he said. Emergency spousal support while there's an active restraining order? That's like asking someone to pay alimony to their stalker. What's our response? Oh, this is going to be fun. I'm going to write a response that basically says, our client cannot provide financial support to someone who has claimed in court documents that such support constitutes abuse. To do so would be to admit guilt to the charges of financial abuse, and would potentially violate the restraining order by inserting our client back into Mrs. Blackwell's financial life against her expressed wishes. In other words, we're using the restraining order against them. Exactly. They created this legal framework. Now they get to live with it. The response letter was a thing of beauty. Gregory had a gift for legal writing that managed to be both professionally respectful and completely savage at the same time. He pointed out that providing financial support to someone who had claimed such support was abusive would be contrary to the spirit of the restraining order and potentially harmful to Mrs. Blackwell's stated goal of achieving independence from allegedly controlling financial arrangements. He also noted that the request for spousal support came at the same time that Mrs. Blackwell's mother was facing criminal charges for attempting to fraudulently access my financial accounts, creating obvious concerns about the family's approach to financial matters. The letter concluded with an offer to discuss spousal support through proper legal channels once the restraining order was withdrawn, and Mrs. Blackwell had demonstrated a commitment to lawful and honest financial practices. It was the legal equivalent of a polite middle finger, and I loved every word of it. By Friday, the local gossip network was working overtime. My barber, Tony, was practically vibrating with excitement when I came in for my weekly trim. "Did you hear about that boutique owner's mother?" he asked before I'd even sat down. "Got arrested for fraud. Apparently, she was forging signatures left and right, trying to steal money from banks and insurance companies." "No kidding," I said, settling into the chair. "My wife says the whole family's bad news. The daughter's got that fancy store, but word is she's about to lose it because she can't pay her bills. And now the mother's going to jail for trying to steal money. What kind of people do that? Desperate people, I guess. Desperate, hell. That's criminal people. You don't just accidentally forge someone's signature multiple times." As Tony worked on my hair, he continued his running commentary on the fall of the Thompson-Blackwell criminal enterprise. Apparently, Serena's boutique had lost another employee. The assistant manager had quit without notice, leaving just Serena and one part-time worker to run the whole operation. "My wife went by there yesterday," Tony continued. "Place looked like a ghost town. No customers, half the racks empty, and the owner looked like she hadn't slept in a week. It was all coming together exactly as I'd predicted. The loan default was now just 18 days away. Serena had no employees and no money. Her mother was facing serious jail time, and her new lawyer was the kind of guy who advertised on bus benches. Sometimes the universe really does have a sense of humor, and sometimes the best revenge really is just stepping back and letting people destroy themselves." I tipped Tony generously and drove home, humming along to the radio and feeling better about life than I had in years. The call came on a Tuesday afternoon from a number I didn't recognize but somehow felt familiar. When I picked up, the voice on the other end was calm, weathered, and carried the weight of hard-earned experience. "Adrian, this is Edward Thompson, Serena's father." I nearly dropped my phone. In 4 years of marriage, I'd met Edward exactly twice. Brief, awkward encounters at family gatherings where he'd seemed more interested in avoiding his ex-wife and daughter than engaging in conversation. Serena rarely talked about him, and when she did, it was usually with a mixture of resentment and dismissal. "Edward," I said carefully, "this is unexpected. I imagine it is." His voice was steady, resigned. "I heard about what's been happening. The restraining order, Lorraine's arrest, the business troubles. I wanted you to know that not everyone in this family has lost their damn minds." There was something in his tone that made me sit up straighter. This wasn't a man calling to plead his daughter's case or negotiate on her behalf. This was someone who understood exactly what was happening and why. "Adrian, I went through this exact same shit with Lorraine 23 years ago. The false accusations, the forged documents, the restraining orders filed to gain leverage while keeping the money flowing. Hell, she even tried to have me committed once when I threatened to cut off her credit cards." The pieces started falling into place. Edward's absence from family events, his obvious discomfort around his ex-wife and daughter, the way he'd always seemed like he was waiting for the other shoe to drop. "Serena learned all this from her mother," he continued. "The manipulation, the victim act, the financial schemes, it's generational. Lorraine did it to me, and now Serena's doing it to you. Why are you telling me this? Because you're doing exactly the right thing by not caving. They'll escalate, they'll make threats, they'll find new victims to exploit, but eventually they'll move on to easier targets. Don't be their ATM, son. I made that mistake for 15 years. When he hung up, I felt something I hadn't expected, validation from someone who actually understood. Day 26. For days before the loan defaulted. That's when Serena finally snapped and did the one thing that guaranteed her complete and total legal destruction. I was in my office around 2 in the afternoon when Melissa's panicked voice came through the intercom. "Adrian, your wife is here. She's screaming in the lobby." By the time I got downstairs, Serena was in full meltdown mode. Her hair was a mess, her makeup was running, and she was gesticulating wildly while yelling at anyone within earshot. The few clients in the waiting area were staring in horrified fascination, like they were watching a nature documentary about rabid animals. "This is all your fault," she screamed when she saw me. "You're destroying everything I worked for." You're ruining my life out of spite. Ma'am, I said calmly. There's a restraining order. Fuck the restraining order. I need you to fix this. The bank is taking everything tomorrow. My employees are gone. I'm losing the store. Security arrived within minutes. I called them the second I saw her car in the parking lot. As they escorted her out, she kept screaming about how I was a monster, how I'd manipulated the system, how she'd make me pay for destroying her dreams. The police arrested her 20 minutes later for violating her own restraining order. The next day, Lorraine tried staging a press conference outside the courthouse, ranting about financial abuse and systemic injustice. A reporter cut her short. Ma'am, weren't you arrested for forging your son-in-law's signature? The clip went viral as an example of PR disasters. Meanwhile, the boutique officially closed its doors. Inventory seized, assets frozen, reputation destroyed. All without me lifting a finger. The irony was perfect. Serena had filed a restraining order to control my behavior, then violated it herself when that control didn't work. She'd handed me the ultimate victory by destroying her own credibility in the most public way possible. Sometimes justice really does serve itself. 6 months later, the dust had settled into a pattern that would have been hilarious if it weren't so predictable. Serena and Lorraine were living together in a cramped apartment across town, both broke and thoroughly disgraced. Lorraine had gotten 18 months for the fraud charges, though she was currently out on bail pending appeal. Serena's boutique was a distant memory, replaced by a smoothie shop that actually turned a profit. The restraining order still had 9 months left on it, and I'd never been happier about a legal document in my life. It was like having a force field against financial manipulation. Every time Travis Kellerman sent another desperate letter demanding support, Gregory would respond with polite reminders about the court's protection order and my obligation not to interfere with Serena's independence. Their latest offer had been particularly pathetic. 6 months of financial support in exchange for withdrawing the abuse allegations. Gregory had actually laughed out loud when he read it to me over the phone. They want you to pay them to admit they lied about you being abusive, he'd said. The audacity is almost impressive. As for me, that $4,000 a month I used to hemorrhage on Serena's lifestyle had been redirected into investments, retirement savings, and small personal luxuries that actually brought me joy. I'd taken up cooking classes, bought a ridiculous espresso machine that made coffee better than most cafes, and started weekend hiking trips that cleared my head and reminded me what peace felt like. The restraining order meant to chain me had become the key to my freedom. Serena thought she was cornering me with legal threats, but she'd handed me the cleanest break imaginable. No fights, no guilt, no messy negotiations, just instant liberation wrapped in official court documents. Sometimes the trash really does take itself out. And sometimes, the best revenge is just letting people destroy themselves while you build something better. The judge said, all assets to your ex-wife and her new husband. I smiled because she had no idea. What was coming next? You know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and men? Well, turns out my wife Caroline had some pretty spectacular plans of her own, and I was about as welcome in them as a vegan at a barbecue competition. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me back up and tell you how my perfectly ordinary Tuesday turned into the kind of disaster that makes reality TV look like amateur hour. My name's Thomas Mercer, and up until about 3 hours ago, I thought I was living the American dream. 2-story colonial in the suburbs, white picket fence that I actually painted myself last summer like some kind of domestic superhero, and a wife who could make Pinterest boards weep with envy. Hell, I even had one of those lawn mowers that makes those satisfying diagonal stripes in the grass. The whole 9 yards, complete with a golden retriever that Caroline insisted we name Gatsby, because apparently we needed our dog to be as pretentious as our neighborhood book club. I'd been in Chicago for 3 days, schmoozing clients and pretending to care about quarterly projections while secretly counting down the hours until I could get back home. The meetings wrapped up early. Some miracle involving the CEO actually making a decision instead of forming another committee to think about forming a committee, so I decided to surprise Caroline. You know, the whole romantic husband returns early thing. Maybe we'd order Thai food, binge-watch something mindless on Netflix, and I'd listen to her complain about whatever drama was unfolding at that fancy art gallery where she worked. Typical married couple stuff. The drive back from O'Hare was pure hell, naturally. Chicago traffic has this special way of making you question every life choice that led you to that particular moment. Sitting in a metal box surrounded by other people in metal boxes, all of us collectively losing our minds at 5 miles per hour. But I was pumped. I had this whole mental movie playing out. Caroline's surprised face, maybe a little squeal of delight, definitely some quality time that didn't involve her scrolling through Instagram while I pretended to watch whatever cooking show she'd discovered that week. I pulled into our driveway around 4:30, noting that Caroline's silver BMW was parked at its usual angle that somehow managed to take up exactly 1 3/4 parking spaces. The woman could parallel park like she was conducting brain surgery, but give her a driveway, and suddenly geometry became her mortal enemy. I grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk, already mentally rehearsing my "honey, I'm home early" entrance. That's when I heard her voice drifting through the screen door. Now, here's the thing about eavesdropping. It's like opening Pandora's box, except Pandora's box is your marriage, and instead of unleashing evil upon the world, you're just unleashing evil upon your Tuesday afternoon. I should have announced myself. Should have walked right through that door, kissed my wife, and asked her about her day like a normal human being. Instead, I found myself frozen on my own front porch like some kind of suburban statue, listening to my wife of 15 years absolutely demolish my existence with the casual efficiency of someone ordering a latte. "Bradley, I know it's complicated, but we've talked about this." Her voice had that breathless quality she usually reserved for discussing vacation plans or new shoes. "The divorce papers are already drawn up. My lawyer says with his temper and the recordings I have, I'll get at least 70% of everything." "Recordings? What recordings?" I racked my brain trying to remember the last time I'd lost my temper. Last week I'd gotten mildly annoyed when she'd loaded the dishwasher wrong. Again, but I'd expressed my frustration by reorganizing the plates in silence like a proper passive-aggressive suburban husband. I know, she continued, and I could practically hear her twirling that strand of blonde hair she always played with when she was excited. "Once this is over, we can finally be together. Really together. No more sneaking around, no more hotel rooms. Just you, me, and enough money to do whatever we want." Bradley Morrison, her boss at the Morrison Gallery. The guy I'd met at Christmas parties and office functions, with his perfectly groomed beard and his habit of pronouncing gallery like it rhymed with salary. The same Bradley who'd complimented my tie at their company picnic last summer while apparently planning to dismantle my marriage from the inside. "Thomas will never see it coming," Caroline laughed, and the sound hit me like a brick to the solar plexus. It wasn't her fake laugh, the one she used at dinner parties when someone told a story that wasn't actually funny. This was genuine Caroline amusement, the kind I used to love hearing when we watched comedies together back, when we actually watched anything together. I stood there on my own porch, overnight bag in hand, listening to my wife discuss my financial destruction with the enthusiasm of someone planning a surprise birthday party. Except the surprise was on me, and instead of cake, I was apparently getting served with divorce papers and a side order of complete humiliation. "He's so predictable," she went on. "Works late, travels for business, never questions anything. Honestly, Bradley, sometimes I think he's more married to that lawn mower than he is to me." Okay, that hurt. I mean, yes, I took pride in my lawn care, but it wasn't like I'd ever chosen yard work over quality time with my wife. Although, come to think of it, quality time with Caroline lately had mostly involved listening to her complain about everything from the neighbor's dog to the temperature of her coffee to the general inadequacy of my existence as a human being. "The recordings are perfect," she said, and my blood went from warm to absolute zero. "I've been editing them for months. Just little clips here and there. Him losing his temper, raising his voice, sounding threatening. My lawyer says it's exactly what we need to prove he's unstable. 15 years. 15 goddamn years of marriage, of thinking we were building something together, of believing that the woman I'd pledged my life to actually gave a damn about that life. I thought about all those nights she'd seemed distant, all those times she'd claimed to be working late, all those weekends she'd suddenly developed an urgent need to visit her sister Claire in the city. The pieces weren't just falling into place. They were slam-dunking themselves into place with the force of a meteor hitting Earth. I heard her moving around inside, probably pacing the way she did when she was really excited about something. I have to go, she said. He'll be back from Chicago tomorrow, and I need to practice looking surprised when he comes home. You know how he gets when he thinks something's wrong. Actually, Caroline, I get observant. There's a difference, though I was starting to realize you'd never bothered to learn it. The call ended, and I heard her footsteps heading toward the kitchen. I had maybe 30 seconds to figure out how to play this. Walk in and confront her? Pretend I hadn't heard anything? Set the house on fire and claim insurance money? That last option was looking pretty tempting, not gonna lie. Instead, I took a deep breath, plastered what I hoped was a convincing smile on my face, and opened the front door like a man walking into his own execution. Honey, I called out, dropping my bag by the door. I'm home early. The war, I realized, had already begun. Caroline just didn't know I'd finally shown up to fight. If acting was an Olympic sport, Caroline would have taken home the gold, silver, and bronze medals while simultaneously coaching the entire U.S. team. The woman's performance when I walked through that door was nothing short of spectacular. The kind of acting that makes you wonder if she'd been practicing in front of a mirror for years, perfecting the art of being a lying, cheating wife. Tommy, she squealed, practically bouncing across the hardwood floors in those ridiculous fuzzy slippers she insisted on wearing everywhere. For a split second, I almost believed her excitement was genuine. Almost. But when you've just heard someone planning your financial execution with the enthusiasm of a kid planning Christmas morning, it's hard to buy into the whole loving wife routine. She threw her arms around me like I was a soldier returning from war instead of a husband back from 3 days of mind-numbing business meetings. Her perfume, that expensive stuff she bought at Nordstrom and claimed was an investment in our marriage, hit me like a cloud of betrayal-scented lies. I missed you so much, she breathed into my ear, and I had to fight the urge to ask if she'd missed me as much as she'd missed planning my destruction with Bradley the art gallery Romeo. Missed you too, sweetheart. I managed, my voice somehow staying steady despite the fact that my entire world had just been rearranged like furniture in an earthquake. Chicago was brutal. Nothing but conference rooms and bad coffee. Poor baby, she cooed, running her fingers through my hair the way she used to when we were actually happy. Or when I thought we were happy. At this point, I was starting to question whether our entire marriage had been one long con job with me as the mark. I made reservations at Chez Laurent for tonight. I thought we could celebrate you coming home. Chez Laurent, the fancy French place downtown where they charge $40 for what amounts to artistic arrangements of food on oversized plates. The same place where she'd probably practiced her innocent wife routine between plotting sessions with Bradley. I wondered if she'd rehearsed her surprised expression in their bathroom mirror, right between courses of overpriced duck confit. That sounds perfect, I said, because apparently I was now committed to this whole performance art piece we were creating together. The show must go on, even when the show is your marriage imploding in slow motion. For the next few hours, I got a front row seat to the Caroline Mercer masterclass in deception. She flitted around the house like a woman who had absolutely nothing to hide, chatting about her day at the gallery, complaining about traffic, asking about my meetings with the kind of interest that would have been touching if it wasn't complete bullshit. Oh, and the weirdest thing happened today, she said while putting on her makeup, applying mascara with the precision of someone painting the Sistine Chapel. Dana called and said she saw someone who looked exactly like you at that coffee shop on 5th Street. But you were in Chicago, so obviously it wasn't you. Dana Fletcher, Caroline's best friend since college, and her partner in what I was now realizing was probably a conspiracy that would make Watergate look like a middle school prank. I'd always thought Dana was harmless, just another suburban housewife with too much time and too many opinions about other people's business. Now I was wondering if she was part of Caroline's little support team, helping manufacture evidence of my supposed crimes against matrimony. That's weird, I agreed, watching her face in the mirror. Must have been my evil twin. She laughed, that fake laugh again, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. How long had she been practicing this? How many conversations had we had where she was essentially performing a one-woman show titled Innocent Wife Married to Terrible Husband? At dinner, Caroline outdid herself. She ordered wine like she was celebrating something special, touched my hand across the table like we were newlyweds, and told stories about the gallery with the kind of animated enthusiasm that would have been charming if I didn't know she was basically auditioning for the role of wronged woman in the upcoming production of Thomas Mercer Gets Screwed Over. Bradley's been such a pain lately, she said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. He's been micromanaging everyone, making all these demands about exhibition schedules. I swear, sometimes I think he forgets that some of us have lives outside of work. The casual way she said his name, like he was just some annoying boss instead of her co-conspirator in Operation Destroy Thomas, was almost impressive. I had to admire the sheer audacity of it. Here she was, probably still tasting his lies on her lips from whatever afternoon rendezvous they'd had, complaining about him like he was nothing more than an occupational hazard. Maybe he's just stressed, I suggested, taking a sip of wine that suddenly tasted like liquid irony. You know how these artistic types can be. Maybe, she said, but something flickered across her face. Just for a second, like she was remembering something pleasant. Probably remembering how Bradley looked without his perfectly pressed gallery owner shirts. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of Caroline's greatest hits. Concerns about the neighbor's new fence, excitement about some upcoming gallery opening, complaints about the grocery store changing their produce layout. Normal married couple conversation, except nothing about it was normal anymore. Every word felt like part of an elaborate script, every smile like a costume she was wearing. When we got home, she made a big show of being tired, claiming all the excitement of my return had worn her out. She disappeared into the bathroom for her nightly routine, the same routine that apparently now included practicing her victim face in the mirror and probably texting Bradley about how well her performance was going. I sat on our bed, watching her move around the bedroom we'd shared for 15 years, and tried to process the fact that I was living with a stranger. This woman who knew exactly how I liked my coffee, who could predict my reactions to movies before I had them, who'd seen me sick and healthy and everything in between. This woman was essentially a highly skilled actress who'd been method acting the role of my wife for God knows how long. "You're quiet tonight," she said, sliding under the covers beside me. Even her concern sounded rehearsed. "Just tired," I said. "Long day." She curled up next to me, resting her head on my chest the way she had thousands of times before. Except now it felt like sharing a bed with a very attractive, very dangerous con artist. Her breathing gradually slowed into the rhythm of sleep, but I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow would bring more of the same. More performances, more lies, more elaborate theater designed to make me look like the villain in my own life story. But now I knew I was watching a show, which meant I could start planning my own performance. If Caroline thought she was the only one who could play a role, she was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. You know that moment when you realize you've brought a butter knife to a gunfight? Yeah, that was me for about 12 hours after Caroline's little performance. But here's the thing about getting sucker punched by your own wife. It either breaks you or it makes you really, really focused. And buddy, I was about as focused as a laser beam cutting through steel. I spent that sleepless night doing what any rational person would do when they discover their spouse is plotting their financial assassination. I Googled best divorce lawyers near me, like my life depended on it. Because, let's face it, it kind of did. Caroline had clearly been planning this hostile takeover for months, maybe years, while I'd been living in blissful ignorance, worried about lawn care and quarterly reports like some kind of suburban amateur. The name Patricia Hendricks kept popping up in every search, every legal forum, every best of list I could find. They called her the shark, the destroyer, and my personal favorite, the divorce attorney who makes other divorce attorneys cry. Her website looked like something out of a legal thriller, all sharp edges and testimonials that read like war stories from the trenches of matrimonial combat. I called her office at exactly 8 a.m., figuring I'd leave a message and maybe hear back in a few days. Instead, her secretary, who sounded like she could intimidate a Supreme Court justice, put me through immediately. "Mr. Mercer," came a voice that could cut glass. "I've been expecting your call." That stopped me cold. Expecting my call. "Your wife contacted several attorneys in the city last month, including myself." I declined to represent her. There was amusement in her voice, the kind that suggested she knew exactly how this story was going to end. Something about her approach didn't sit right with me. Professional instinct. Well, damn. Apparently Caroline's shopping for legal representation had been about as subtle as a marching band in a library. "Can you see me today? 2 o'clock. Don't bring any documents. We'll handle that later." Just bring your story and your checkbook. Patricia Hendriss's office was located in one of those glass towers downtown that made you feel like you were entering the Death Star. The kind of building where people wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and where everyone walked like they were late for a meeting that would determine the fate of Western civilization. Her reception area looked like it had been designed by someone who wanted to intimidate clients into honesty. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that probably cost more than my car, and law books arranged with the precision of a military formation. The whole place screamed serious business, which was exactly what I needed because Caroline's little game was about as serious as business gets. When Patricia finally emerged from her office, I understood immediately why Caroline had walked away from this particular consultation. The woman was intimidating in the way that icebergs are intimidating. You could see the tip, but you knew there was a lot more danger lurking beneath the surface. She was probably in her 50s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored by someone who charged by the precision of each stitch. But it was her eyes that really got your attention, sharp, calculating, missing absolutely nothing. The kind of eyes that could spot a lie from 3 states away. "Mr. Mercer," she said, extending a hand that gripped mine with the firmness of someone who'd spent decades crushing opposing counsel's arguments. "Let's talk." Her office was even more impressive than the reception area. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, bookshelves lined with legal tomes that looked like they contained the secrets of the universe, and a desk that could have doubled as a landing strip for small aircraft. The walls were covered with framed newspaper clippings, bar association awards, and what looked like thank you letters from clients who'd probably walked out of their divorces with everything except their spouse's fillings. "So," she said, settling behind her desk like a general preparing for battle, "your wife is planning to ambush you with divorce papers, claims to have recordings of you being abusive, and is sleeping with her boss. Did I miss anything?" I blinked. "How did you?" "Mr. Mercer, I've been doing this for 30 years. Your wife's strategy is about as original as a rerun of a bad sitcom. The fake recordings, the manufactured evidence, the affair with someone in a position of power. It's Divorce Attorney 101. The only question is whether you're going to let her get away with it." For the next hour, I laid out everything I knew. The phone call, Caroline's performance, the timeline of her sudden work commitments, and late nights at the gallery. Patricia listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in handwriting that looked like it had been carved in stone by someone who charged by the letter. "Your wife made several critical mistakes," she said when I finished. "First, she underestimated you. Second, she overestimated her own cleverness. And third, she tried to hire me. Why is that last one a mistake?" Patricia smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made opposing counsel consider career changes. "Because now I know her strategy, her timeline, and her weaknesses. And more importantly, I know exactly how to dismantle everything she's built." She reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a business card. "Mark Sandler, private investigator. He's the best in the business, and more importantly, he's meticulous. If your wife is having an affair, he'll document it. If she's hiding assets, he'll find them. If she's manufactured evidence, he'll prove it. Is he expensive? Mr. Mercer, your wife is planning to take 70% of everything you own, plus alimony that would make a lottery winner wince. Trust me, Mark's fees are going to look like pocket change compared to what you'll lose if we don't build an airtight case." She stood up, and I got the distinct impression that our consultation was moving into the action phase. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to go home and pretend everything is normal. You're going to be the perfect husband, flowers, dinners, attention, the whole 9 yards. Meanwhile, Mark is going to document your wife's extracurricular activities, and I'm going to build a case that will make her wish she'd never heard of divorce court. How long do we have?" Based on her previous consultations, I'd say she's planning to serve you within the next few weeks. That gives us just enough time to turn her ambush into our counterattack. As I was leaving, Patricia handed me a thick folder. "Homework," she said. "Financial documents, timeline of suspicious behavior, character witnesses. I want you to document everything, and I mean everything. If your wife changed her perfume, I want to know about it. If she started working out, I want to know about it. If she so much as bought different brand of coffee, I want to know about it." Walking back to my car, I felt something I hadn't experienced since Caroline's phone call: hope. Not the naive hope of a husband who thinks his marriage can be saved, but the cold, calculating hope of a man who's finally realized he's been playing checkers while his wife was playing chess. Well, Caroline, I thought as I drove home to whatever performance was waiting for me. Turns out I just learned how to play chess too. And I brought some very expensive, very ruthless coaches. Game on. Mark Sandler looked like the kind of guy you'd never notice in a crowd, which, according to Patricia, was exactly why he was so damn good at his job. Average height, forgettable face, the kind of generic appearance that made him invisible in a world where everyone was too busy staring at their phones to pay attention to anything else. But his eyes, those were anything but average. Sharp, calculating, missing absolutely nothing. The guy could probably tell you what someone had for breakfast just by watching them walk. We met at a coffee shop downtown. One of those trendy places where they charge $8 for what amounts to burned water with delusions of grandeur. Mark ordered black coffee, no sugar, no cream, no nonsense, while I fumbled with the menu like some kind of caffeinated amateur. Patricia filled me in on the basics, he said, pulling out a tablet that looked like it could hack into the Pentagon. Cheating wife, manufactured evidence, planned financial ambush. Standard Tuesday for me, really. How long have you been doing this? 15 years. Started as a cop, got tired of seeing criminals walk free on technicalities, switched to private investigation where I could actually make a difference. He sipped his coffee like it was truth serum. Your wife's type. I've seen it 100 times. They think they're criminal masterminds, but they're usually just desperate housewives who've watched too many legal dramas. Over the next hour, Mark laid out his plan with the precision of a military strategist. Surveillance, financial tracking, digital forensics, the whole 9 yards. He explained how he'd document Caroline's movements, track her communications, and build a timeline that would make her affair look like a badly scripted soap opera. The key, he said, is patience. Your wife thinks she's being clever, but people having affairs are predictable. They develop patterns, routines, habits. Once I identify those patterns, documenting them becomes as easy as following a recipe. What about the recordings she mentioned? The one she's been editing? Mark's smile was colder than my overpriced latte. That's where she made her biggest mistake. Fabricated evidence leaves digital fingerprints everywhere, metadata, editing software traces, device histories. If she's been splicing recordings to make you sound abusive, I'll prove it. And when I do, her credibility in court will be somewhere south of a used car salesman's. The surveillance started the next day. While I played the role of oblivious husband at home, Mark became Caroline's shadow. He followed her to work, documented her lunch meetings, tracked her evening shopping trips that somehow never resulted in any actual purchases. Within a week, he had enough photographic evidence to stock a small museum of marital betrayal. The pictures he showed me were like getting punched in the gut repeatedly by reality. There was Caroline, walking hand in hand with Bradley through Millennium Park like they were starring in their own romantic comedy. Caroline and Bradley sharing intimate dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford on special occasions. Caroline and Bradley checking into the Palmer House Hotel for what Mark diplomatically called afternoon meetings. Your wife's not exactly subtle, Mark observed, scrolling through what looked like a greatest hits collection of adultery. They hit the same 3 restaurants, the same hotel, even park in the same spots. It's like they're following a script. But the photographs were just the appetizer. The main course came when Mark started digging into Caroline's digital footprint. Bank records showing cash withdrawals that coincided with her meetings with Bradley. Credit card statements revealing charges at lingerie stores and expensive restaurants during times when she'd told me she was working late or visiting her sister. Your wife's been busy, Mark said, spreading out financial documents across his desk like a poker player revealing a royal flush. She's opened 3 separate bank accounts in the past 6 months, all funded with cash deposits that match her withdrawals from your joint account. She's also been using a prepaid credit card for what I can only describe as affair maintenance, hotels, dinners, gifts for her boyfriend. The most damning evidence came from Caroline's own devices. Mark had somehow managed to recover deleted text messages, emails, and even voice recordings from her phone and laptop. Don't ask me how. The guy operated like some kind of digital wizard crossed with a bloodhound. The recovered messages were a masterclass in criminal stupidity. Caroline and Bradley discussing their plan in explicit detail, laughing about how easy it would be to take Thomas for everything he's worth. There were voice memos of Caroline practicing her victim routine, complete with fake tears and rehearsed sob stories about my supposed abuse. But the crown jewel of Mark's investigation was discovering Caroline's audio editing software. Apparently, she'd been using some professional-grade program to splice together recordings of me from completely different conversations, creating fake evidence of verbal abuse that never actually happened. She took a recording of you yelling at a Bears game and spliced it with her asking about dinner plans, Mark explained, playing back the original recordings alongside Caroline's fabricated versions. The edited version makes it sound like you screamed at her for asking what you wanted to eat. The reality is you were yelling touchdown at your TV. I listened to Caroline's manufactured evidence with a mixture of horror and grudging admiration. The woman had essentially created an alternate reality where I was some kind of domestic tyrant, using my own voice as the weapon against me. It was diabolical, creative, and completely insane. How many of these fake recordings does she have? 17 that I've found so far. She's been building this case against you for at least 8 months, maybe longer. Every argument, every moment of frustration, every time you raised your voice, she's been recording and editing it into evidence of abuse. Patricia's financial investigation revealed the other half of Caroline's master plan. She'd been systematically documenting our assets, photographing important documents, and even having our house appraised without my knowledge. Bradley, it turned out, wasn't just her affair partner. He was also helping her hide money and plan for her post-divorce life. They've already put a deposit down on a condo in River North, Patricia informed me during one of our strategy sessions. Apparently, they're planning to move in together as soon as your divorce is finalized. They've even picked out furniture. The scope of Caroline's deception was breathtaking. While I'd been worried about lawn care and work deadlines, she'd been orchestrating a complete identity theft of my life. Every smile, every kiss, every moment of apparent intimacy had been part of an elaborate con game designed to strip me of everything I'd worked for. But here's the thing about building a house of cards. It only takes one good push to bring the whole thing crashing down. And thanks to Mark's investigation, we now had enough evidence to create a hurricane. So what's our next move? I asked Patricia during our final preparation meeting. Her smile was sharp enough to cut diamonds. We wait for her to make the first move. Let her serve you with those papers. Let her file for that restraining order. Let her put on her little victim performance in court. Then we show the judge exactly what kind of victim she really is. Caroline had spent months building her case against me. Too bad for her. We'd spent weeks building an even better case against her. The trap was set. Now all we had to do was wait for her to walk into it. If Caroline thought she was the only one who could play the long game, she was about to get a master class in strategic planning from someone who'd spent 15 years learning her every tell, every habit, and every weakness. While she was busy building her elaborate house of lies, I was quietly constructing something much more substantial, a financial fortress that would make Fort Knox look like a piggy bank. Daniel Cruz had been my financial advisor for almost a decade, the kind of guy who could make money multiply like rabbits and had the ethics of a Swiss banker crossed with a Jesuit priest. When I called him for an urgent consultation, he cleared his calendar faster than a fire alarm evacuation. "Tom," he said, settling into his office chair that probably cost more than most people's cars. "You sounded stressed on the phone. What's going on?" I laid out the situation with the clinical precision of a surgeon describing a tumor. Caroline's affair, her financial manipulations, the impending divorce papers, and most importantly, her plan to walk away with 70% of everything I'd worked for since college. Daniel listened without interrupting, occasionally making notes in that careful handwriting that financial advisors seem to learn in some secret school. When I finished, he leaned back and steepled his fingers like he was contemplating the mysteries of the universe. "How long do we have?" he asked. "Patricia thinks she'll serve the papers within the week. Then we need to move fast. And we need to move smart." Daniel pulled out a legal pad and started sketching what looked like a flowchart designed by someone who'd read every financial strategy book ever written. "The good news is, most of your assets are things we can legally protect. The bad news is, we have to do it without triggering any flags that might alert Caroline or her attorney. Over the next 3 days, Daniel and I orchestrated what I like to think of as the great asset migration of 2024. It was like watching a master chess player execute a strategy that had been planned 20 moves in advance, except instead of chess pieces, we were moving around investments, properties, and bank accounts. First up was the house. Our beautiful two-story colonial that Caroline loved to show off to her book club friends was suddenly no longer owned by Thomas and Caroline Mercer. Instead, it now belonged to Meridian Property Holdings LLC, a corporation that I happened to control, but that existed in a legal gray area that would give Caroline's lawyer nightmares for months. How is this legal? I asked Daniel as we signed the paperwork. Because it is legal, he said with the confidence of someone who'd navigated tax codes and property laws like a GPS system. You're not hiding assets, you're restructuring them. The house is still part of the marital estate, technically, but now it's wrapped in enough legal protections that Caroline's 70% grab becomes significantly more complicated. Next came the investment accounts. Daniel had connections at banks that most people had never heard of, the kind of institutions that specialized in what he called wealth preservation strategies. Within 48 hours, my retirement accounts, stock portfolios, and investment properties were scattered across the financial landscape like seeds planted in the most fertile legal soil money could buy. Swiss accounts? I asked, watching Daniel type commands into his computer with the speed of someone playing a very expensive video game. Better. Domestic trusts, offshore LLCs, and investment vehicles that are completely legitimate but structured in ways that make them difficult to liquidate quickly. Daniel's smile was the kind that probably made IRS auditors wake up in cold sweats. Your wife wants 70% of your assets. She's welcome to try to figure out where they all are first. The most elegant part of the whole operation was how we handled the business. My consulting firm, which Caroline had always dismissed as boring corporate stuff, suddenly became the crown jewel of our defensive strategy. Daniel restructured it as an international entity with holdings in 3 different countries, each with their own beautifully complex legal requirements. The beauty of this, Daniel explained as we watched my business assets disappear into a labyrinth of legal entities, is that Caroline probably doesn't even understand what your company does, let alone how it's structured. She's been so focused on the house and the obvious bank accounts that she's ignored the real wealth. But my favorite part of the whole restructuring was what Daniel called the reverse Caroline. While my wife had been secretly moving money into hidden accounts, we were doing the exact opposite, making everything visible but untouchable. See, Caroline's strategy was to hide assets and then claim poverty, Daniel said, showing me a spreadsheet that looked like it had been designed by someone who spoke fluent mathematics. But your strategy is to make everything completely transparent while making it legally impossible for her to access. We created a trust fund for the fictional children we'd never had, established charitable foundations that would make us look like philanthropists, and set up educational funds that could only be accessed for purposes that Caroline would never qualify for. Every penny was accounted for, every transaction was documented, but try to grab it without jumping through about 40 legal hoops? Good luck with that. The offshore components were Daniel's masterpiece. Not illegal, not hidden, just strategically located in jurisdictions that had legal systems designed by people who understood that wealth preservation was an art form. The Cayman Islands, Switzerland, Luxembourg, places where financial privacy wasn't just respected, it was practically a religious belief. Your wife wants to play hardball? Daniel asked as we finalized the last of the transfers. Let's see how she handles international banking laws and treaty obligations. By the end of the week, I was technically worth the same amount of money as before, but good luck proving it in a way that would satisfy a divorce court in Illinois. My assets were spread across so many legal entities, jurisdictions, and investment vehicles that untangling them would require a team of international lawyers and probably 6 months of court battles. The real genius was in the timing. Every transfer, every restructuring, every legal maneuver was completed just days before Caroline made her move. From the outside, it would look like routine financial management. From the inside, it was the most sophisticated defensive strategy I'd ever been part of. One last thing, Daniel said as we wrapped up our final meeting. Your wife has been watching your normal bank accounts, right? The ones she has access to. Probably. Good. Because we're going to make sure those accounts show exactly what she expects to see. Normal spending, normal deposits, normal suburban husband financial activity. Let her think she knows where all the money is. That night, I went home to Caroline's latest performance, something involving takeout Chinese food and fake concern about my stress levels. She asked about my day with the enthusiasm of someone genuinely interested in my well-being, and I told her about meetings and phone calls and routine business stuff. "You've been working so hard lately," she said, reaching across the table to touch my hand. "Maybe you should think about slowing down, enjoying life more." The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. Here was my wife, who'd been planning my financial destruction for months, suggesting I should relax and stop worrying about money. It was like a serial killer recommending that their victim should really learn to trust people more. "You're probably right," I said, squeezing her hand like a man who still believed his wife actually cared about his welfare. "Maybe after we get through this busy season at work." "That sounds perfect," she said, and for just a moment, I caught something in her eyes. Anticipation, excitement, the look of someone who thought their plan was about to pay off in a big way. "Oh, Caroline," I thought as I watched her clear the dinner dishes with the efficient movements of someone who'd probably already mentally redecorated our house for her new life with Bradley. "You have no idea what you're walking into." The financial fortress was complete, the legal ramparts were in place, and every asset that mattered was now protected by enough legal barriers to stop an army of divorce attorneys. Caroline could serve her papers whenever she wanted. I was ready for war. March 15th. The Ides of March. If Shakespeare were writing my life story, he probably would have chosen a different date for dramatic effect. But Caroline apparently wasn't much for literary symbolism. She was, however, excellent at theatrical timing, which is why she chose a cold Tuesday morning when the neighborhood was buzzing with the usual suburban activity. Kids waiting for school buses, commuters grabbing coffee, stay-at-home parents walking dogs, to stage her grand finale. I was in my home office, reviewing quarterly reports and pretending to be a normal husband concerned with normal business things, when I heard the doorbell. Not unusual. We got plenty of deliveries, solicitors, and neighbors dropping by to borrow sugar or complain about someone's hedge growing too close to the property line. What was unusual was Caroline's voice, suddenly bright and cheerful, calling out, "I'll get it, honey." The enthusiasm in her tone was about as subtle as a fireworks display. This wasn't Caroline answering the door for a package or a Girl Scout selling cookies. This was Caroline answering the door for her moment of triumph. I stayed in my office, but I could hear everything through the thin walls of our supposedly soundproof house. Caroline's voice, overly surprised and concerned. A man's voice, official and apologetic. The rustle of papers being exchanged. The whole production was so carefully orchestrated that I almost wanted to applaud. "Tommy?" Caroline called out, and there was something in her voice. A tremor that could have been genuine emotion or could have been the result of months of rehearsing this exact moment. "Could you come here for a minute?" I found her standing in our foyer, looking like a woman who'd just received the worst news of her life. She was holding a thick manila envelope in one hand and clutching a tissue in the other, her eyes already red-rimmed with what appeared to be tears. Standing next to her was a sheriff's deputy who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on earth. "Mr. Thomas Mercer?" the deputy asked, consulting a clipboard like he was checking items off a very unpleasant grocery list. "That's me. I'm Deputy Martinez with the Cook County Sheriff's Office. I'm here to serve you with legal documents in the matter of Mercer versus Mercer." He handed me an envelope that felt heavier than it should have, considering it was just paper. "You're being served with a petition for dissolution of marriage, a motion for temporary support, and a request for a protective order." A protective order. Of course, because apparently I was such a dangerous, unstable husband that my wife needed legal protection from my threatening presence. The same presence that had brought her flowers last week and listened patiently while she complained about the neighbor's dog barking. "Thank you," I said, taking the papers with what I hoped looked like stunned confusion. Is this really happening?" Caroline let out a sob that would have made soap opera actresses weep with envy. "I'm sorry, Tommy. I'm so sorry. I tried to make it work, but I can't do this anymore." The deputy shifted uncomfortably, clearly wanting to escape this domestic drama as quickly as possible. "Mr. Mercer, you'll need to appear in court on the dates specified in those documents. You should probably contact an attorney." "Of course," I said, Because what else do you say when your wife has just legally declared war on you in front of a man with a badge and a gun? I understand. After Deputy Martinez left, probably grateful to get back to dealing with normal criminals instead of suburban marital warfare, Caroline and I stood in our foyer like two actors who'd forgotten their lines. The silence stretched between us, filled with 15 years of marriage that had apparently been building to this exact moment. Caroline, I said finally, what's this about a protective order? Her performance shifted into a higher gear. More tears, more tissue clutching, more of that trembling voice that suggested she was a woman who'd been pushed to her absolute breaking point by a monster masquerading as a husband. I was scared, she whispered, not meeting my eyes. Your temper has been getting worse, and I just need some space to figure things out. My temper, right. The same temper that had never once been directed at her in anger, unless you counted my mild irritation about dishwasher loading techniques as domestic violence. But this was Caroline's masterpiece, the culmination of months of planning and preparation. She'd set the stage, arranged the props, and now she was delivering her Academy Award-worthy performance. I don't understand, I said, playing my part as the confused husband. When have I ever? Caroline, I've never hurt you. I've never even raised my voice to you. You don't remember, she said, and there was something almost convincing about the way she said it. The recordings, the things you've said. I have proof, Tommy. I have everything documented. Of course she did. The edited recordings, the manufactured evidence, the carefully crafted narrative that painted me as an abusive husband and her as the long-suffering victim. It was all there in those papers, probably presented with the kind of legal precision that would make a prosecutor proud. I opened the envelope and scanned the documents, playing the role of a man reading about his own character assassination for the first time. The petition for dissolution was standard stuff, irreconcilable differences, division of assets, all the usual divorce boilerplate. But the motion for temporary support was a work of art. Caroline wasn't just asking for alimony. She was asking for 70% of our assets, full ownership of the house, my car, and monthly support payments that would have made a lottery winner wince. According to these papers, I was apparently so wealthy that supporting Caroline in the lifestyle to which she'd become accustomed would require roughly the GDP of a small country. The protective order was the real masterpiece, though. It painted a picture of Thomas Mercer that was so completely divorced from reality that I almost looked around to see if there was another Thomas Mercer standing behind me. According to Caroline's sworn statement, I was a volatile, emotionally abusive husband who'd been escalating toward physical violence. She had recordings, witnesses, and documented evidence of my dangerous behavior. 70%. I said, looking up from the papers. Caroline, this is everything we've built together. I know, she said, and for just a moment, I caught something in her expression, not remorse, but satisfaction. The look of someone who thought they'd just played their winning hand. But I need security, Tommy. After everything that's happened, I need to know I'll be okay. Everything that's happened. As if our marriage had been some kind of ongoing domestic nightmare instead of 15 years of suburban normalcy punctuated by the occasional disagreement about vacation destinations and whose turn it was to take out the garbage. I need to call a lawyer, I said, because that's what any normal husband would say when presented with papers that essentially accused him of being a monster and demanded most of his worldly possessions as compensation. Of course, Caroline said, her voice soft and understanding. Take all the time you need. I'll be staying with my sister for a while, until the court decides about the protective order. Her sister Claire, the same sister who'd probably been coaching Caroline through this whole performance, helping her rehearse her lines and perfect her victim act. I wondered if Claire knew she was harboring a woman who'd spent months planning one of the most elaborate cons I'd ever seen, or if she genuinely believed Caroline's story about her abusive husband. When are you leaving? I asked. Today, she said, and I noticed she didn't look around the house with any nostalgia or regret. I already packed some things. They're in my car. Of course they were. Caroline had probably been packed and ready for weeks, just waiting for the right moment to make her dramatic exit. This whole morning had been choreographed with the precision of a Broadway musical, right down to the timing of the sheriff's deputy and the strategic placement of tissue boxes. I watched my wife of 15 years walk upstairs to collect her remaining belongings, each step taking her further away from the life we'd built together and closer to whatever future she'd planned with Bradley Morrison. The house felt different already, like someone had rearranged all the furniture while I wasn't looking. When she came back down with a suitcase that looked suspiciously like it had been packed by someone who'd given this moment a lot of thought, Caroline paused at the front door. For a second, I thought she might say something real, an explanation, an apology, maybe even a moment of honesty about what she'd really been doing for the past several months. Instead, she gave me that same sad smile she'd been practicing, the one that suggested she was a woman forced into impossible circumstances by a husband who'd left her no choice. "I really am sorry, Tommy," she said. "I hope someday you'll understand why I had to do this." And then she was gone, leaving me alone in our house with a stack of legal papers that accused me of being someone I'd never been and demanded compensation for crimes I'd never committed. I stood in the sudden silence of my empty house, holding the documents that were supposed to destroy my life, and smiled. Caroline thought she'd just delivered the knockout punch. What she'd actually done was walk straight into the trap we'd been setting for weeks. Patricia was going to love this. The Cook County Courthouse is one of those imposing granite monuments to justice that makes everyone who walks through its doors feel like they're either about to get salvation or completely screwed over. On this particular gray Thursday morning, I was betting that both things were going to happen, just not to the people who expected them. I arrived early, partly because Patricia had drilled into me the importance of punctuality, and partly because I wanted to watch Caroline's grand entrance. After weeks of preparation, I was genuinely curious to see how she'd present herself for the main event. Would she go with traumatized victim? Wronged woman seeking justice? Or maybe she'd surprise me with something completely new from her repertoire of fictional personas. The courtroom itself looked like something out of a legal drama. All dark wood and high ceilings, with that particular smell that courtrooms have, like old papers and broken dreams seasoned with industrial-strength disinfectant. Judge Margaret Chen's bench dominated the room like a fortress, and the witness stand looked like an electric chair designed by someone with a law degree. Patricia sat beside me, reviewing her notes with the calm efficiency of a surgeon preparing for a particularly delicate operation. She was wearing what she called her intimidation suit, charcoal gray, perfectly tailored, with the kind of sharp lines that made opposing counsel nervous just looking at her. "Remember," she murmured as people began filtering into the courtroom, "whatever happens today, you're the confused, hurt husband who still can't understand why his marriage fell apart. You're disappointed, you're sad, but you're not angry. Anger makes judges nervous." Got it. Wounded puppy, not rabid dog. Exactly. That's when Caroline made her entrance. And holy hell, she had outdone herself. If I thought her performance on my doorstep was impressive, this was like watching Shakespeare if Shakespeare had been written by someone with a master's degree in psychological manipulation. She was wearing a navy blue dress that managed to be both professional and vulnerable. Expensive enough to show she had taste, but not so expensive that she looked like she was rolling in money. Her hair was pulled back in a style that suggested she was too emotionally distraught to spend much time on personal grooming, and her makeup was subtle except for the slight redness around her eyes that suggested she'd been crying recently. But the real masterpiece was her body language. The way she walked into that courtroom, shoulders slightly hunched, eyes downcast, moving like someone who was forcing herself to be brave despite overwhelming fear. Even her breathing seemed calculated, quick and shallow like someone fighting off panic attacks. Behind her came her legal team, led by Raymond Keller, a lawyer who looked like he'd stepped out of a commercial for expensive divorce attorneys. Perfectly styled silver hair, a suit that probably cost more than most people's monthly mortgage, and the kind of confident swagger that suggested he'd never met a wealthy husband he couldn't financially destroy. Following Keller was Caroline's parade of supporting players. Dana Fletcher, her best friend and star witness, dressed in what I could only describe as concerned friend chic. Dr. Sarah Martinez, a therapist who'd apparently been treating Caroline for the trauma of being married to me, looking appropriately grave and professional. And lurking in the back of the gallery like a guilty conscience was Bradley Morrison himself, trying to look like an innocent bystander instead of the home-wrecking gallery owner who'd been planning this whole circus. Judge Chun called the court to order, and Raymond Keller stood up to deliver his opening statement with the theatrical flair of someone who'd been practicing in front of a mirror for weeks. "Your Honor," he began, his voice carrying just the right note of righteous indignation. "We are here today because Caroline Mercer has finally found the courage to escape from a marriage that has become a prison of emotional and psychological abuse." Oh, this was going to be good. I settled back in my chair and prepared to watch Caroline's legal team paint me as the kind of monster who probably kicked puppies and stole Christmas presents from orphans. "For 15 years, Keller continued, pacing in front of the judge like a prosecutor in a murder trial, "my client has endured a pattern of controlling, manipulative behavior that has systematically stripped away her sense of self-worth and independence." He gestured toward Caroline, who was sitting at the plaintiff's table looking like she was barely holding herself together. On cue, she dabbed at her eyes with a tissue, the picture of a woman summoning every ounce of strength just to be in the same room as her abusive husband. "Thomas Mercer," Keller said, turning to point at me like I was a war criminal, "presents himself to the world as a successful businessman and devoted husband. But behind closed doors, he is a different man entirely. Controlling, volatile, emotionally manipulative." I had to give him credit. Keller was selling this story with the conviction of someone who actually believed it. Either Caroline had fed him an incredibly convincing version of our marriage, or he was just really, really good at his job. My client has endured years of financial control, where every purchase had to be approved, every expense questioned, every attempt at independence crushed under the weight of his need to dominate every aspect of their shared life. Financial control. That was rich, considering Caroline had been secretly moving money into hidden accounts for months. But I kept my expression neutral, the picture of a man who couldn't understand why his reasonable fiscal responsibility was being characterized as abuse. When Caroline took the stand, the transformation was complete. Gone was any trace of the confident, scheming woman I'd discovered on that phone call. In her place sat a broken bird of a person, speaking in a voice barely above a whisper, pausing frequently to collect herself as she painted a picture of our marriage that bore no resemblance to reality. "He never hit me," she said, and the way she said it suggested that physical violence would have been easier to bear than what she'd actually endured. But the emotional abuse was constant. The way he would dismiss my opinions, control our finances, make me feel like I was walking on eggshells all the time. She described incidents I barely remembered, casual conversations transformed through her testimony into episodes of psychological warfare. The time I'd questioned her spending on an expensive handbag became evidence of financial abuse. My request that she let me know when she'd be home late became proof of controlling behavior. Even my habit of organizing the dishwasher efficiently was somehow twisted into an example of my need to dominate our domestic life. "I started recording our conversations," Caroline continued, her voice breaking just enough to suggest she was ashamed of having to resort to such measures, "because I was starting to question my own memory." He would deny saying things, claim I was overreacting, make me feel like I was going crazy. Gaslighting. The classic abuser's tactic, according to Caroline's version of events. What she didn't mention was that she'd been the one manipulating those recordings, splicing together fragments of different conversations to create evidence that didn't actually exist. Dana Fletcher's testimony was a masterclass in loyal friendship taken to criminal extremes. She described tearful phone calls where Caroline had confided her fears, shared stories of my alleged controlling behavior, and painted herself as the concerned friend who'd been urging Caroline to seek help for years. She was afraid to leave him, Dana said, clutching a tissue like a prop in a community theater production. She thought he might hurt her or destroy her financially. She felt trapped. Dr. Martinez added the professional veneer that every good con job needs. As Caroline's therapist, she testified about the symptoms of emotional abuse she'd observed, the way Caroline had exhibited classic signs of someone living in a psychologically toxic environment. Mrs. Mercer displayed all the hallmarks of someone trapped in an emotionally abusive relationship, Dr. Martinez explained with the authority of someone who'd written papers on the subject. Anxiety, depression, a diminished sense of self-worth, and a persistent fear of her husband's reactions to normal domestic situations. The most damning part of Caroline's case was the audio evidence. Keller played recording after recording of what sounded like me being exactly the kind of controlling, verbally abusive husband that no reasonable judge would want to reward in a divorce settlement. "Caroline, you never listened to me," my voice rang out in the courtroom, followed by, "I'm sick of your attitude, and maybe I should just leave." Sitting there listening to my own voice, saying things I'd never actually said in that context, I had to admire the technical skill involved. Caroline had been working on this audio Frankenstein for months, carefully collecting fragments of different conversations and stitching them together into a narrative that painted me as an emotional terrorist. The financial evidence was equally impressive in its creativity. Caroline's team presented documents showing years of what they characterized as financial control, joint accounts that I supposedly monitored obsessively, credit cards with spending limits, investment decisions made without her input. What they didn't mention was that Caroline had never shown any interest in our finances beyond spending the money I earned. She'd never wanted to balance a checkbook, never asked to review investment statements, never expressed any desire to be involved in financial planning beyond choosing which restaurants we could afford. But now, through the magic of legal reframing, my responsible management of our household finances had become evidence of systematic financial abuse designed to keep her dependent and powerless. By the time Caroline's team finished presenting their case, they'd painted a picture of our marriage that was so convincing, so thoroughly documented, and so emotionally compelling that I almost started to feel sorry for the poor woman married to such a monster. Almost. Raymond Keller concluded his presentation with a flourish that would have made a Broadway director proud. "Your Honor, Caroline Mercer deserves justice. She deserves to rebuild her life free from the man who systematically destroyed her sense of self-worth for 15 years. She deserves fair compensation for the years she lost, the career opportunities she sacrificed, and the emotional trauma she endured. 70% of all marital assets," he said, letting the number hang in the air like a prayer to the goddess of divorce settlements. "Substantial alimony to help her rebuild the life that Thomas Mercer's controlling behavior prevented her from living. And most importantly, the peace of mind that comes from knowing she'll never again have to live in fear of the man who promised to love and protect her." As Keller returned to his seat, I could see the satisfaction on Caroline's face. Not the broken, traumatized expression she'd been wearing for the cameras, but a fleeting moment of genuine pleasure. She thought she'd just delivered the performance of a lifetime. She had no idea that the real show was about to begin. When Patricia Hendress rose from her chair, the entire courtroom seemed to shift. It was like watching a predator wake up from a nap, graceful, deliberate, and absolutely terrifying if you happened to be the prey. She adjusted her jacket with the precision of someone checking a weapon, picked up a single file folder, and walked toward Judge Chen's bench like she was about to perform surgery on Caroline's entire case. "Your Honor," Patricia began, her voice carrying the kind of calm authority that made everyone in the room sit up straighter. "What we've just witnessed is indeed a masterful performance. Unfortunately for the plaintiff, it's been a performance of fiction, not fact." I watched Caroline's face carefully. For just a split second, something flickered behind her eyes. Not the broken vulnerability she'd been projecting, but something sharper. Alert, like a con artist who'd just realized the mark might not be as stupid as they'd thought. "Mrs. Mercer has painted a compelling picture of an abusive marriage," Patricia continued, opening her folder with the casual efficiency of someone who was about to ruin several people's entire day. "She's presented audio evidence, witness testimony, and financial records that seem to support her claims. The only problem is, none of it is true." Raymond Keller was already on his feet. "Objection, Your Honor. Counsel is making accusations without foundation." "Mr. Keller," Judge Chen interrupted, her voice carrying the kind of patience that judges reserve for lawyers who are about to get educated. "I'll allow Ms. Hendress to present her case. You'll have your chance to respond." Patricia smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made opposing counsel consider career changes. "Thank you, Your Honor. Let's start with those compelling audio recordings we just heard." She gestured to Mark Sandler, who was sitting in the gallery with a laptop that looked like it belonged to NASA. "Your Honor, I'd like to present the unedited versions of Mrs. Mercer's audio evidence." The first recording filled the courtroom, and I watched Caroline's face go from confident to confused to absolutely horrified as she heard my actual voice in its original context. "Caroline, you never listen to me when I'm trying to explain why I had to work late tonight," my voice said clearly. "I know it's frustrating, but this client meeting ran over." Then came the second recording. "I'm sick of this traffic. We're going to be late for dinner with your parents." And the third, "Maybe I should just leave this party early. This networking event is putting me to sleep." The courtroom was dead silent as the implications sank in. Caroline had taken fragments of normal, innocent conversations and stitched them together to create evidence of abuse that had never happened. The woman who'd just testified about being gaslit had been gaslighting an entire courtroom. "As you can hear, Your Honor," Patricia said, her voice cutting through the silence like a scalpel, "Mrs. Mercer has been quite creative with audio editing software. What you heard in her presentation were pieces of different conversations, recorded over several months, and spliced together to create fictional evidence of abuse." Caroline's lawyer was frantically whispering in her ear, but she wasn't responding. She was staring at Patricia like someone watching their entire world collapse in real time. "But the audio manipulation is just the beginning," Patricia continued, moving to her next exhibit like a conductor leading an orchestra of destruction. "Mr. Sandler, would you please show the court exhibit B?" The first photograph appeared on the courtroom's display screen, and I heard someone in the gallery actually gasp. It was Caroline and Bradley, sitting in that trendy cafe downtown, holding hands across the table and gazing at each other like they were starring in their own romantic comedy. The second photo showed them leaving the Morrison Gallery together, fingers intertwined. The third caught them entering the Meridian Hotel, both carrying overnight bags. These photographs, Patricia explained with the clinical precision of a pathologist describing a murder scene, were taken over the past 6 weeks. They document Mrs. Mercer's ongoing affair with her employer, Bradley Morrison, who I notice is sitting in the gallery today. Every head in the courtroom turned toward Bradley, who looked like he wanted to crawl under his seat and disappear. The man who'd been so confident about stealing another man's wife suddenly looked like he'd rather be anywhere else on the planet. "Your Honor," Patricia continued, "Mrs. Mercer hasn't just been lying about the state of her marriage. She's been systematically planning this divorce while conducting an affair, manipulating evidence, and coaching witnesses." She gestured toward Dana Fletcher, who had gone from concerned friend to deer in headlights in about 30 seconds. "Ms. Fletcher, I believe you testified that you received tearful phone calls from Mrs. Mercer about her husband's abusive behavior." Dana nodded weakly, probably realizing she was about to become collateral damage in Caroline's imploding master plan. "Interesting," Patricia said, pulling out another document. "Because according to phone records, most of your conversations with Mrs. Mercer took place at your home address, not over the phone. In fact, we have audio recordings of you and Mrs. Mercer rehearsing testimony in your living room." The recording that played next was like listening to a really bad community theater rehearsal. Caroline's voice, clear and confident, nothing like the broken whisper she'd used on the stand, coaching Dana on how to describe incidents that had never happened. "Remember, make it sound like you were really worried about me," Caroline's voice instructed. "Like you thought Thomas might actually hurt me. That's what sells the story." "Should I mention the time he supposedly threw the coffee mug?" Dana asked. "No, we decided that one was too hard to verify. Stick to the emotional stuff, the controlling behavior, the financial abuse, the way he made me feel trapped." Judge Chin's expression had shifted from professional interest to something much colder. She was looking at Caroline like someone studying a particularly unpleasant specimen under a microscope. But Patricia wasn't done. Not even close. "Your Honor, we also need to address the financial evidence presented by the plaintiff's team. Mrs. Mercer has claimed that she was financially controlled and abused by my client. The reality is quite different. The financial records that appeared on the screen told a story that was the exact opposite of everything Caroline's team had presented. Secret bank accounts, hidden transfers, money moved offshore, credit lines opened without my knowledge, all of it documented with the precision of a forensic accountant who'd had weeks to prepare. Mrs. Mercer has been systematically moving marital assets for the past 8 months, Patricia explained. Roughly $200,000 has been transferred to accounts that my client knew nothing about. This isn't financial abuse. This is fraud. Caroline's face had gone completely white. All the careful makeup, all the practiced vulnerability, all the theatrical preparation in the world couldn't hide the fact that she looked like someone who'd just realized they were about to go to prison. Furthermore, Patricia continued, building momentum like a freight train heading downhill. Mrs. Mercer has been using credit cards opened in my client's name to fund her affair. Hotel rooms, expensive dinners, gifts for Mr. Morrison, all charged to accounts that my client will be responsible for paying. She produced receipt after receipt, a paper trail of adultery funded by the man Caroline was trying to destroy in court. The irony was so thick you could cut it with a knife. She'd been using my money to pay for her betrayal. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this case, Patricia said, her voice taking on the kind of grave tone usually reserved for war crimes tribunals, is the recordings we discovered of Mrs. Mercer and Mr. Morrison discussing their plans for this divorce. The final recording was the nuclear option, and Patricia played it with the timing of someone who'd been waiting for exactly this moment. It was Caroline and Bradley, probably recorded in his car or office, discussing their strategy with the casual cruelty of two people planning to rob a bank. Once the divorce goes through, we'll have enough money to do whatever we want, Caroline's voice said, clear and confident and completely free of the traumatized victim persona she'd been performing. Thomas will never see it coming. He's so predictable, so trusting. It's almost too easy. 70% should be enough to set us up nicely, Bradley's voice added. Maybe we can finally take that trip to Europe you've been talking about. The best part, Caroline laughed, that genuine laugh I'd once loved hearing, is that he'll probably still think this is about our marriage problems. He has no idea I've been planning this for months. The silence that followed was the kind of absolute quiet that happens right before an earthquake. Judge Chun was staring at Caroline with an expression that could have frozen lava, and Caroline looked like she was about to faint. Raymond Keller was on his feet, but for the first time all day, he seemed to have lost his silver-tongued confidence. Your Honor, these recordings could have been taken out of context. Mr. Keller, Judge Chin said, and her voice carried the kind of authority that made grown lawyers whimper. I think we've heard quite enough context. She turned her attention to Caroline, who was sitting at the plaintiff's table looking like someone who'd just watched their own execution. Mrs. Mercer, do you have anything to say in response to this evidence? Caroline opened her mouth, but no sound came out. For the first time in months, maybe years, she was completely speechless. The woman who'd had an answer for everything, who'd planned every contingency, who'd rehearsed every emotional response, had finally encountered a situation her acting skills couldn't handle. The truth. Patricia returned to her seat with the satisfaction of someone who'd just performed a perfect surgical procedure. She'd systematically dismantled every piece of Caroline's case, exposed every lie, and revealed the elaborate conspiracy for exactly what it was. Your Honor, she said as she sat down, I believe the evidence speaks for itself. It did indeed. And what it was saying was that Caroline Mercer had just made the biggest mistake of her life. If you've ever wondered what justice looks like when it's served ice-cold with a side of poetic revenge, let me tell you, it's a beautiful thing to witness. Judge Margaret Chin sat behind her bench like an avenging angel in a black robe, and the look on her face suggested that she was about to deliver the kind of judicial smackdown that would be talked about in legal circles for years to come. The courtroom had that electric tension you get right before a tornado touches down. Everyone knew something catastrophic was about to happen. They just weren't sure exactly how much devastation was going to be left in its wake. Caroline sat at the plaintiff's table looking like someone who'd just watched their house burn down while they were still inside it, and Raymond Keller had the expression of a lawyer who was already mentally drafting his malpractice insurance claim. Judge Chun took her time reviewing the evidence Patricia had presented, occasionally glancing up at Caroline with the kind of look that would make seasoned criminals consider confessing to crimes they hadn't even committed yet. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, broken only by the sound of Caroline's increasingly panicked breathing and the scratch of the court reporter's fingers flying across her stenotype machine. In 35 years on this bench, Judge Chin finally began, her voice carrying the weight of someone who'd seen every form of human deception imaginable. I have rarely encountered a case that represents such a calculated and systematic attempt to defraud both the court system and an innocent spouse. The words hit Caroline like physical blows. I watched her flinch with each phrase, her carefully constructed victim persona crumbling faster than a sandcastle in a hurricane. She kept glancing toward the gallery, probably looking for Bradley, but her knight in shining armor had apparently decided that discretion was the better part of valor and had vanished the moment Patricia started playing those recordings. Mrs. Mercer, Judge Chun continued, focusing her laser-like attention on my soon-to-be ex-wife. You have presented this court with fabricated evidence, perjured testimony, and a conspiracy to commit fraud that is breathtaking in both its scope and its audacity. Caroline tried to speak, opening her mouth like a fish gasping for air, but Judge Chun held up a hand that could have stopped a freight train. The audio recordings you presented as evidence of domestic abuse were deliberately manipulated to create fictional scenarios that never occurred. The financial abuse you claim to have suffered was, in fact, standard marital financial management, while you were simultaneously engaged in actual financial fraud, moving more than $200,000 into secret accounts. The judge's voice was getting sharper with each word, like a blade being honed on a whetstone. The emotional trauma you described so eloquently was apparently overcome quite easily when you were planning your scheme with Mr. Morrison, as evidenced by the recordings where you laugh about your husband's supposed predictability and discuss how to maximize your fraudulent settlement. I had to admit, hearing the judge systematically dismantle Caroline's case was more satisfying than any revenge fantasy I could have imagined. This wasn't just justice. This was justice with style, delivered by someone who clearly didn't appreciate having her courtroom turned into a theater for elaborate con games. Furthermore, Judge Chun continued, the evidence shows that you coached witnesses to provide false testimony, staged fake crime scenes to simulate domestic violence, and engaged in a systematic campaign of character assassination against your husband, a man who, based on the actual evidence presented, appears to have been guilty of nothing more than working hard to support a household and marriage you were actively working to destroy. Raymond Keller finally found his voice, though it came out as more of a croak than actual words. Your Honor, if I may. You may not. Judge Chin cut him off with the efficiency of a paper shredder. I'm not finished. She turned her attention back to Caroline, who had gone from pale to a shade of white that suggested she might be experiencing some kind of medical emergency. Mrs. Mercer, the recordings we heard today don't just reveal fraud. They reveal a complete lack of remorse, conscience, or basic human decency. You plan to destroy a man's reputation, steal his assets, and ruin his life, all while congratulating yourself on your cleverness. The judge paused, letting that assessment hang in the air like a toxic cloud. The court finds that not only are your claims of abuse completely without merit, but that you are guilty of fraud, perjury, and criminal conspiracy. This is not a case of marital discord. This is a case of premeditated theft disguised as divorce proceedings. Caroline finally managed to find her voice, though it came out as barely more than a whisper. Your Honor, I can explain. Explain what, Mrs. Mercer? Explain how you accidentally recorded yourself planning to defraud your husband? Explain how you accidentally moved $200,000 into secret accounts? Explain how you accidentally manufactured evidence and coached witnesses to commit perjury. Judge Chin's tone suggested that Caroline would have better luck explaining how she'd accidentally become a professional bank robber. The only thing you need to explain is why this court shouldn't hold you in contempt and refer this matter to the district attorney for criminal prosecution. The mention of criminal prosecution hit Caroline like a bucket of ice water. She actually swayed in her chair, gripping the table like it was the only thing keeping her from falling over. Raymond Keller looked like he was considering whether he could claim that he'd been hypnotized or drugged when he agreed to take this case. However, Judge Chun continued, this is a family court, not a criminal court, and my primary responsibility is to resolve the marital dispute before me. So let me make the court's findings absolutely clear. The judge said, all assets to your ex-wife and her new husband. I smiled because she had no idea what was coming next. You know what they say about the best laid plans of mice and men? Well, turns out my wife Caroline had some pretty spectacular plans of her own, and I was about as welcome in them as a vegan at a barbecue competition. But I'm getting ahead of myself here. Let me back up and tell you how my perfectly ordinary Tuesday turned into the kind of disaster that makes reality TV look like amateur hour. My name's Thomas Mercer, and up until about 3 hours ago, I thought I was living the American dream. Two-story colonial in the suburbs, white picket fence that I actually painted myself last summer like some kind of domestic superhero, and a wife who could make Pinterest boards weep with envy. Hell, I even had one of those lawn mowers that makes those satisfying diagonal stripes in the grass. The whole 9 yards, complete with a golden retriever that Caroline insisted we name Gatsby, because apparently we needed our dog to be as pretentious as our neighborhood book club. I'd been in Chicago for 3 days, schmoozing clients and pretending to care about quarterly projections while secretly counting down the hours until I could get back home. The meetings wrapped up early, some miracle involving the CEO actually making a decision instead of forming another committee to think about forming a committee, so I decided to surprise Caroline. You know, the whole romantic husband returns early thing. Maybe we'd order Thai food, binge-watch something mindless on Netflix, and I'd listen to her complain about whatever drama was unfolding at that fancy art gallery where she worked. Typical married couple stuff. The drive back from O'Hare was pure hell, naturally. Chicago traffic has this special way of making you question every life choice that led you to that particular moment. Sitting in a metal box surrounded by other people in metal boxes, all of us collectively losing our minds at 5 miles per hour. But I was pumped. I had this whole mental movie playing out. Caroline's surprised face, maybe a little squeal of delight, definitely some quality time that didn't involve her scrolling through Instagram while I pretended to watch whatever cooking show she'd discovered that week. I pulled into our driveway around 4:30, noting that Caroline's silver BMW was parked at its usual angle that somehow managed to take up exactly 1 3/4 parking spaces. The woman could parallel park like she was conducting brain surgery, but give her a driveway, and suddenly geometry became her mortal enemy. I grabbed my overnight bag from the trunk, already mentally rehearsing my "honey, I'm home early" entrance. That's when I heard her voice drifting through the screen door. Now, here's the thing about eavesdropping. It's like opening Pandora's box, except Pandora's box is your marriage, and instead of unleashing evil upon the world, you're just unleashing evil upon your Tuesday afternoon. I should have announced myself. Should have walked right through that door, kissed my wife, and asked her about her day like a normal human being. Instead, I found myself frozen on my own front porch like some kind of suburban statue, listening to my wife of 15 years absolutely demolish my existence with the casual efficiency of someone ordering a latte. "Bradley, I know it's complicated, but we've talked about this." Her voice had that breathless quality she usually reserved for discussing vacation plans or new shoes. "The divorce papers are already drawn up. My lawyer says with his temper and the recordings I have, I'll get at least 70% of everything." "Recordings? What recordings?" I racked my brain trying to remember the last time I'd lost my temper. Last week I'd gotten mildly annoyed when she'd loaded the dishwasher wrong. Again, but I'd expressed my frustration by reorganizing the plates in silence like a proper passive-aggressive suburban husband. I know, she continued, and I could practically hear her twirling that strand of blonde hair she always played with when she was excited. "Once this is over, we can finally be together. Really together. No more sneaking around, no more hotel rooms. Just you, me, and enough money to do whatever we want." Bradley Morrison, her boss at the Morrison Gallery. The guy I'd met at Christmas parties and office functions, with his perfectly groomed beard and his habit of pronouncing gallery like it rhymed with salary. The same Bradley who'd complimented my tie at their company picnic last summer while apparently planning to dismantle my marriage from the inside. "Thomas will never see it coming," Caroline laughed, and the sound hit me like a brick to the solar plexus. It wasn't her fake laugh, the one she used at dinner parties when someone told a story that wasn't actually funny. This was genuine Caroline amusement, the kind I used to love hearing when we watched comedies together back, when we actually watched anything together. I stood there on my own porch, overnight bag in hand, listening to my wife discuss my financial destruction with the enthusiasm of someone planning a surprise birthday party. Except the surprise was on me, and instead of cake, I was apparently getting served with divorce papers and a side order of complete humiliation. He's so predictable, she went on. Works late, travels for business, never questions anything. Honestly, Bradley, sometimes I think he's more married to that lawn mower than he is to me. Okay, that hurt. I mean, yes, I took pride in my lawn care, but it wasn't like I'd ever chosen yard work over quality time with my wife. Although, come to think of it, quality time with Caroline lately had mostly involved listening to her complain about everything from the neighbor's dog to the temperature of her coffee to the general inadequacy of my existence as a human being. The recordings are perfect, she said, and my blood went from warm to absolute zero. I've been editing them for months. Just little clips here and there. Him losing his temper, raising his voice, sounding threatening. My lawyer says it's exactly what we need to prove he's unstable. 15 years. 15 goddamn years of marriage, of thinking we were building something together, of believing that the woman I'd pledged my life to actually gave a damn about that life. I thought about all those nights she'd seemed distant, all those times she'd claimed to be working late, all those weekends she'd suddenly developed an urgent need to visit her sister Claire in the city. The pieces weren't just falling into place. They were slam-dunking themselves into place with the force of a meteor hitting Earth. I heard her moving around inside, probably pacing the way she did when she was really excited about something. I have to go, she said. He'll be back from Chicago tomorrow, and I need to practice looking surprised when he comes home. You know how he gets when he thinks something's wrong. Actually, Caroline, I get observant. There's a difference, though I was starting to realize you'd never bothered to learn it. The call ended, and I heard her footsteps heading toward the kitchen. I had maybe 30 seconds to figure out how to play this. Walk in and confront her? Pretend I hadn't heard anything? Set the house on fire and claim insurance money? That last option was looking pretty tempting, not gonna lie. Instead, I took a deep breath, plastered what I hoped was a convincing smile on my face, and opened the front door like a man walking into his own execution. Honey, I called out, dropping my bag by the door. I'm home early. The war, I realized, had already begun. Caroline just didn't know I'd finally shown up to fight. If acting was an Olympic sport, Caroline would have taken home the gold, silver, and bronze medals while simultaneously coaching the entire U.S. team. The woman's performance when I walked through that door was nothing short of spectacular. The kind of acting that makes you wonder if she'd been practicing in front of a mirror for years, perfecting the art of being a lying, cheating wife. Tommy, she squealed, practically bouncing across the hardwood floors in those ridiculous fuzzy slippers she insisted on wearing everywhere. For a split second, I almost believed her excitement was genuine. Almost. But when you've just heard someone planning your financial execution with the enthusiasm of a kid planning Christmas morning, it's hard to buy into the whole loving wife routine. She threw her arms around me like I was a soldier returning from war instead of a husband back from 3 days of mind-numbing business meetings. Her perfume, that expensive stuff she bought at Nordstrom and claimed was an investment in our marriage, hit me like a cloud of betrayal-scented lies. I missed you so much, she breathed into my ear, and I had to fight the urge to ask if she'd missed me as much as she'd missed planning my destruction with Bradley the art gallery Romeo. Missed you too, sweetheart. I managed, my voice somehow staying steady despite the fact that my entire world had just been rearranged like furniture in an earthquake. Chicago was brutal. Nothing but conference rooms and bad coffee. Poor baby, she cooed, running her fingers through my hair the way she used to when we were actually happy. Or when I thought we were happy. At this point, I was starting to question whether our entire marriage had been one long con job with me as the mark. I made reservations at Chez Laurent for tonight. I thought we could celebrate you coming home. Chez Laurent, the fancy French place downtown where they charge $40 for what amounts to artistic arrangements of food on oversized plates. The same place where she'd probably practiced her innocent wife routine between plotting sessions with Bradley. I wondered if she'd rehearsed her surprised expression in their bathroom mirror, right between courses of overpriced duck confit. That sounds perfect, I said, because apparently I was now committed to this whole performance art piece we were creating together. The show must go on, even when the show is your marriage imploding in slow motion. For the next few hours, I got a front row seat to the Caroline Mercer masterclass in deception. She flitted around the house like a woman who had absolutely nothing to hide, chatting about her day at the gallery, complaining about traffic, asking about my meetings with the kind of interest that would have been touching if it wasn't complete bullshit. "Oh, and the weirdest thing happened today," she said while putting on her makeup, applying mascara with the precision of someone painting the Sistine Chapel. "Dana called and said she saw someone who looked exactly like you at that coffee shop on 5th Street. But you were in Chicago, so obviously it wasn't you." Dana Fletcher, Caroline's best friend since college, and her partner in what I was now realizing was probably a conspiracy that would make Watergate look like a middle school prank. I'd always thought Dana was harmless, just another suburban housewife with too much time and too many opinions about other people's business. Now I was wondering if she was part of Caroline's little support team, helping manufacture evidence of my supposed crimes against matrimony. "That's weird," I agreed, watching her face in the mirror. "Must have been my evil twin." She laughed, that fake laugh again, and I felt something cold settle in my chest. How long had she been practicing this? How many conversations had we had where she was essentially performing a one-woman show titled Innocent Wife Married to Terrible Husband? At dinner, Caroline outdid herself. She ordered wine like she was celebrating something special, touched my hand across the table like we were newlyweds, and told stories about the gallery with the kind of animated enthusiasm that would have been charming if I didn't know she was basically auditioning for the role of wronged woman in the upcoming production of Thomas Mercer Gets Screwed Over. "Bradley's been such a pain lately," she said, cutting into her salmon with surgical precision. "He's been micromanaging everyone, making all these demands about exhibition schedules. I swear, sometimes I think he forgets that some of us have lives outside of work." The casual way she said his name, like he was just some annoying boss instead of her co-conspirator in Operation Destroy Thomas, was almost impressive. I had to admire the sheer audacity of it. Here she was, probably still tasting his lies on her lips from whatever afternoon rendezvous they'd had, complaining about him like he was nothing more than an occupational hazard. "Maybe he's just stressed," I suggested, taking a sip of wine that suddenly tasted like liquid irony. "You know how these artistic types can be." "Maybe," she said, but something flickered across her face, just for a second, like she was remembering something pleasant. Probably remembering how Bradley looked without his perfectly pressed gallery owner shirts. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of Caroline's greatest hits. Concerns about the neighbor's new fence, excitement about some upcoming gallery opening, complaints about the grocery store changing their produce layout. Normal married couple conversation, except nothing about it was normal anymore. Every word felt like part of an elaborate script, every smile like a costume she was wearing. When we got home, she made a big show of being tired, claiming all the excitement of my return had worn her out. She disappeared into the bathroom for her nightly routine, the same routine that apparently now included practicing her victim face in the mirror and probably texting Bradley about how well her performance was going. I sat on our bed, watching her move around the bedroom we'd shared for 15 years, and tried to process the fact that I was living with a stranger. This woman who knew exactly how I liked my coffee, who could predict my reactions to movies before I had them, who'd seen me sick and healthy and everything in between. This woman was essentially a highly skilled actress who'd been method acting the role of my wife for God knows how long. "You're quiet tonight," she said, sliding under the covers beside me. Even her concerns sounded rehearsed. "Just tired," I said. "Long day." She curled up next to me, resting her head on my chest the way she had thousands of times before. Except now it felt like sharing a bed with a very attractive, very dangerous con artist. Her breathing gradually slowed into the rhythm of sleep, but I lay there staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Tomorrow would bring more of the same. More performances, more lies, more elaborate theater designed to make me look like the villain in my own life story. But now I knew I was watching a show, which meant I could start planning my own performance. If Caroline thought she was the only one who could play a role, she was about to get a very unpleasant surprise. The game had changed, and I was finally ready to play. You know that moment when you realize you've brought a butter knife to a gunfight? Yeah, that was me for about 12 hours after Caroline's little performance. But here's the thing about getting sucker punched by your own wife. It either breaks you or it makes you really, really focused. And buddy, I was about as focused as a laser beam cutting through steel. I spent that sleepless night doing what any rational person would do when they discover their spouse is plotting their financial assassination, I Googled best divorce lawyers near me, like my life depended on it. Because, let's face it, it kind of did. Caroline had clearly been planning this hostile takeover for months, maybe years, while I'd been living in blissful ignorance, worried about lawn care and quarterly reports like some kind of suburban amateur. The name Patricia Hendricks kept popping up in every search, every legal forum, every best of list I could find. They called her the Shark, the Destroyer, and my personal favorite, the divorce attorney who makes other divorce attorneys cry. Her website looked like something out of a legal thriller, all sharp edges and testimonials that read like war stories from the trenches of matrimonial combat. I called her office at exactly 8 a.m., figuring I'd leave a message and maybe hear back in a few days. Instead, her secretary, who sounded like she could intimidate a Supreme Court justice, put me through immediately. "Mr. Mercer," came a voice that could cut glass. "I've been expecting your call." That stopped me cold. Expecting my call. "Your wife contacted several attorneys in the city last month, including myself." I declined to represent her. There was amusement in her voice, the kind that suggested she knew exactly how this story was going to end. Something about her approach didn't sit right with me. Professional instinct. Well, damn. Apparently Caroline's shopping for legal representation had been about as subtle as a marching band in a library. "Can you see me today? 2 o'clock. Don't bring any documents. We'll handle that later. Just bring your story and your checkbook." Patricia Hendricks' office was located in one of those glass towers downtown that made you feel like you were entering the Death Star. The kind of building where people wore suits that cost more than my monthly mortgage payment, and where everyone walked like they were late for a meeting that would determine the fate of Western civilization. Her reception area looked like it had been designed by someone who wanted to intimidate clients into honesty. Dark wood paneling, leather chairs that probably cost more than my car, and law books arranged with the precision of a military formation. The whole place screamed serious business, which was exactly what I needed because Caroline's little game was about as serious as business gets. When Patricia finally emerged from her office, I understood immediately why Caroline had walked away from this particular consultation. The woman was intimidating in the way that icebergs are intimidating. You could see the tip, but you knew there was a lot more danger lurking beneath the surface. She was probably in her 50s, silver-haired, wearing a suit that looked like it had been tailored by someone who charged by the precision of each stitch. But it was her eyes that really got your attention, sharp, calculating, missing absolutely nothing. The kind of eyes that could spot a lie from 3 states away. "Mr. Mercer," she said, extending a hand that gripped mine with the firmness of someone who'd spent decades crushing opposing counsel's arguments. "Let's talk." Her office was even more impressive than the reception area. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, bookshelves lined with legal tomes that looked like they contained the secrets of the universe, and a desk that could have doubled as a landing strip for small aircraft. The walls were covered with framed newspaper clippings, bar association awards, and what looked like thank you letters from clients who'd probably walked out of their divorces with everything except their spouse's fillings. "So," she said, settling behind her desk like a general preparing for battle, "your wife is planning to ambush you with divorce papers, claims to have recordings of you being abusive, and is sleeping with her boss. Did I miss anything?" I blinked. "How did you?"